Yeah, go ahead. I'll give myself a few.
This is how we turn this on.
Hit the center button and then you'll hit the record.
Are you gonna admit Carolyn?
Well, go ahead, you can do it. Go up to
I got that recording too.
That's why I'd like to have mine hooked up to you so I can, anybody that's out there I've been watching to.
Morning.
Did you, Daniel, did you pick it up?
Okay. Hi Carolyn.
Good yourself.
Do you take
She's
yourself on
muted.
mute?
Yeah. There we go. And, are you up now?
Go ahead.
Okay, so we can bring it to order then. Okay, it's 6 o'clock. I'm gonna bring the study session for Board of Directors, College City Metropolitan District for Tuesday, August 31st to order. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, first on the agenda, Mr. Collins' board asked me to have Mr. DiNardo here and Carolyn. I know you guys want to talk about the Tater and Enterprise. So Sam is here, Sam DiNardo, and Carolyn's online for Zoom.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
You may.
So, Sam, I think I've got a list of questions here. If it's something you can't answer, possibly Carolyn can. First of all, enterprises. We're currently looking at putting the golf course and the campgrounds into enterprise. So, first thing I want to know is, can we go back to 2020? Can we put them in enterprise starting January 1st, 2020?
Do you mean January 1st, 2021?
No, 2020.
That would, that one I think I'm gonna have to defer to Carolyn on. That's a legal question. I have never been involved in a circumstance where we did that, so.
Okay.
I don't know if Carolyn has a response on that one, maybe.
I have also not seen that done. I do not think that would be very effective because you've already completed, well, you just completed your audit for 2021, but you,
For 2020.
sorry, for 2020, you have to amend your 2020 budget at this time to create an enterprise and then have the audit with an enterprise. It would be, I guess it's possible to have completed the audit if you went back and amended your budget, but I think it could be challenged. It's a little bit hard to do. What my general recommendation is you can only do it for the current year going forward.
Okay. So for 2021 for sure.
Yes.
But if we needed to do it back to 2020, that's a big question mark. We're gonna need more research.
I'm not very comfortable with that. I think that would probably be subject to challenge if that year has been complete and hasn't been operated as an enterprise for that year.
Okay. The other, this is probably gonna go to Sam here. Enterprise advantages over keeping them in government.
Well, I think there are just a couple things come to mind, but I think you have to weigh that against disadvantages as well.
Well,
So,
advantages or disadvantages?
One of the advantages is potentially you isolate that revenue stream, but also all of the attendant costs associated with it. So, one of the reasons we use enterprises is just because some activities of government are structured so that they're intended to be fully sort of functional on user fees and not supported by other sources of revenue. And other sources of revenue, depending on what they are, could disqualify it from enterprise status in a given year. So that's a test that could be either satisfied or failed on a year-to-year basis, depending on support from other sources besides, in this case, we're talking about golf course, user fees, or parks and rec, recreational fees.
Well, not Parks and Rec, just campgrounds.
So campground as well, but realize that you have to move all the costs associated with that activity to the enterprise as well.
Yes. Labor,
And
any of that
in
stuff.
all the costs. In the case of the golf course, there would be a practical problem, you know, kind of going back to your question about 2020, is because when that activity got moved years ago from enterprise status to general government, then in general government, all the fixed assets that kind of go with the golf course sit over in what we refer to as a general fixed asset account group. In other words, we don't record depreciation specifically to the enterprise. If we move the golf course or any other qualifying activity into an enterprise, then any assets that we hold that are associated with that activity would go back into the enterprise and depreciation would get recorded there. So, sounds simple, but it
And is that a
does take some-
disadvantage or an advantage?
I think the recording of the depreciation is neither an advantage or disadvantage, frankly.
Okay.
I think, so there may be some advantage to isolating it, but you could have years where it's disadvantageous as well. And I'll give you what I think an example might be, like just right before us. So in 2020, we had more golf course revenue than we'd experienced in previous years, which we think is going to exacerbate the excess revenue problem in the general fund. Excess revenue because we have revenue from non-exempt sources, like sources not exempt under the Tabor rules. And so it gives rise to excess revenue. But it also serves to increase our revenue base for the succeeding year. So in year two, this case, think of 2021, if golf course revenues fall to lower levels or say possibly pre-COVID levels or at least something less than the banner year we enjoyed in 2020, it actually could serve as a buffer, if you will, to reduce the excess revenue problem. But if we move it to an enterprise status, we also have to adjust the base for the revenue and expenditures associated with that activity. So I think there's pros and cons, but it depends on the year. We could have some years where it serves to be advantageous for it to have been isolated. We have other years where it may not be the case, that it's actually more advantageous to have it included in the revenue and spending base for general government, which I think is very likely going to be the circumstance in 2021. So the advantage is you sort of, over a long period of time, I suppose, you do isolate it from general government, and so, you know, those fluctuations that we oftentimes have very little control over sort of get separated from that activity. But realize two things. One is we have some years where having it in the base might be beneficial. And in our case, it's not the only reason that we have excess revenue. So even if the golf course had been removed from general government and isolated to an enterprise for 19 and 20, we would still have had excess revenue. Obviously to a lesser amount, but we would still have had that condition.
Because if I'm not mistaken, go ahead.
Carolyn has a comment. Go ahead, Carolyn.
So I see two main advantages to having enterprise status. The enterprises are exempted from Tabor as long as they meet the statutory definition or the constitutional definition of an enterprise, being a government-owned business authorized to issue its own revenue bonds, receiving less than 10% of its revenue from grants from state and local government combined. So if you were able to meet that standard and declare that you're an enterprise and then budget and account for the money of the enterprise, it takes you out of the Tabor requirements. So one big advantage is that Tabor has a spending limit. That spending limit is an overall limit on all of the district's general funds, everything unless it's an enterprise, or some other very specific exceptions like a gift. But generally everything's going to count towards that spending limit. If we take out one portion of a fund, like the golf course or the campground, put that into a separate fund, that fund no longer has to worry about the spending limit. It is not subject to the neighbor spending limit. So that is one advantage of being an enterprise. So that's especially helpful on fee-based types of services. Where golf course services may go up and down. You don't want to be subject to a spending limit where you have a year where it's particularly hot, lots of good weather, people play more, you're going to bring in extra revenue. Another year, the revenue might drop, and then so that would bring down your spending limit for everything for the following year because that particular year you had less revenue into the golf course. Another advantage is that revenue bonds. So generally, in order to incur multi-fiscal year debt or loan obligation, the district is required to have a loan, to have the loan or bond approved by their voters. In order to do that, there's an exception for revenue bonds issued by enterprises. So if the golf course wanted to take on a new capital project or had anything where it wanted to take on debt, or the campground, then that would take it out of that spending limit. So those are the two biggest advantages I see to having an enterprise. Disadvantages is if you're going to receive grants that can bust your enterprise status for the following year. So if you see a situation where they're going to receive more than 10% of their revenue, either from the general fund because it was just a poor year and they weren't in the black, or if you have are going to receive a grant, that could, in theory, in the following year, lead to that enterprise not qualifying as an enterprise. Now, in that case, what happens is that their spending goes back into that spending limit for the general fund, and that year you couldn't couldn't issue revenue bonds, but you could go back into an enterprise status in the future year. So those are some of the pros and cons of having an enterprise.
So what you're saying is that if we do, say we get a grant for the golf course that goes over 10%, and it disqualifies it for enterprise status for the next year, we can take it back, excuse me, we can take it back into enterprise after that year.
That's correct. So when bond councils are required to give opinions, and each time an enterprise is going out to issue bonds, they have to give an opinion on the enterprise status. And I have definitely seen situations just like that where bond council says, look, for this year we can't give an opinion because you're not going to qualify as an enterprise for this year. Some attorneys interpret that as the year where you exceed that limit, but I think the more general approach and the approach that your bond attorney generally takes is that the following year you would not qualify for enterprise status. So the following year you would not be, the next year you could be again, as long as you're not receiving more than 10%. So it's really, you want to be most of the time self-supporting as a government-owned business so that it can be really a self-supporting fund, mostly supported by fees.
Okay.
But that's the only consequence. You're not, that's the legal consequence if you go on enterprise status, is then you're counted towards the general fund as not counted as enterprise for the following year.
So, excuse me. So a perfect example would be the grants that we get from the county. We would want to make sure that it does not exceed, we want to break that grant up from the county to where the part that's going to the golf course does not exceed 10% of its annual revenue, correct? Is that gross revenue?
That is gross revenue, and that is correct. So the county had said, when I talked with them a couple of years ago on this, they said, well, maybe we could break it down over a couple of years in which we give it to you. Or maybe the money goes into the general fund because it's really for trails rather than a golf course, or for something that can be run through the general fund instead of directly through the golf course. So that would be something we look at on a case-by-case basis. But that's a perfect example of a situation. Another example would be if they just were losing so much money that you had to use tax revenue or general fund revenue just to support that golf course.
Sam,
I think, point of clarification, maybe Carolyn can address this too, but at least recently, all of the money coming from the county has been lottery funds. So that is excluded from the revenue base. If it's other grants, that may not be excluded, but
The lottery funds are?
lottery funds are excluded. They do not exacerbate the excess revenue problem. And at least in the recent years, Carolyn, the money that has come from the county for the golf course has all been GOCO or lottery-based funds. So, are you saying as well that even though that does not cause us to aggravate this excess revenue problem, that because it's used for the golf course, which is a requirement that the county imposes when it passes that money through, that would serve to work against the 10% limit? Because I didn't think it did.
Well, we don't have a court case on this exact issue. You're correct. The courts have decided that in the context of the spending limit for the governmental entity, that GOCO and lottery funds do not count towards the overall spending limit. But they may count towards that 10% for enterprise status. But, so that would be one that we would want to look at. Is there a way to run that not through the enterprise?
Well, I'm sorry, I just wanted to interject. As long as it's all lottery money, that can go into a separate special revenue fund called for conservation trust funds, receipts and expenditures. And at least on the financial statements, it would not be displayed as an element of the revenue or expense related to the enterprise.
Okay, so in that case, it would not be, if it's not going into that enterprise fund and it is not an enterprise account, then that would not count towards the 10% enterprise limit.
Okay, just wanted to be clear on that.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you for clarifying how that's a separate fund.
Thank you both. Okay, so if I can continue.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we've been talking about, let's see here, yeah. So we've also been talking about detabering, okay? So I got some questions on that. I want to know pitfalls for detabering, because we all know the advantages, or I think everybody here on the board already knows the advantages to detabering. But I would like to know pitfalls to detabering, because, excuse me, as much as I enjoy sitting on this board sometimes, I don't plan on being here forever. Okay, so the people that take my place on this board take the place of the city manager. I want to know that if we do detaber, that this isn't going to, is this going to cause some possible pitfalls to the citizens of Colorado City by detabering? Is there bad things that can happen, I guess is what I want to say.
Well, bad things can encompass a lot of different ideas. I can just give you my opinion. My opinion is no. So when we say detaber, we have to realize we're really talking only about we more commonly call it a debrucing, to basically be allowed to operate without the revenue and spending limitations that would be imposed. The other elements of tabor are still required to be followed. So for example, there's rules you have to follow on whether you can incur or issue multi-year debt obligations. There's rules to follow about a mandatory 3% reserve requirement, which still have to be followed. There's rules on the timing and nature of the questions that you ask the voters to approve at a ballot question. And even a debrucing, as we usually refer to it, would not give this board or any future board carte blanche to increase tax rates, either existing taxes or to create a new tax, without a presentation to the voters to approve such a measure.
So the voters would still have to approve any tax
Absolutely,
increases?
yeah, for example, to increase the mill levy beyond its present, level, for whatever purpose you might think that's appropriate, you would have to bring a ballot question to the voters to approve it. If you wanted to increase, an excise tax or a sales tax, similarly, you would have to bring that to the voters for approval. So all the other provisions of Tabor would still be in effect. What it would relieve us is of this obligation to either refund excess revenue if it's from a non-exempt source, which we've experienced that here recently. Or our alternative, which we've not exercised that option up to now at least, would be to ask the voters if we can retain and spend that excess revenue on some certain project or program. So we're really only, when we say debrucing, we're really only doing away with this problem that is caused by the fluctuation of revenues and this predetermined revenue and spending base that we would have to compute under Tabor. All the rest of the provisions stay in place, including the protection to the taxpayers that this or future boards have to go to them to ask for a tax increase, either a mill levy or creation of a new tax for some specified purpose. So from my perspective, at least when we're talking about small local governments, I frankly do not see a disadvantage.
Carolyn?
I agree with Sam that it depends on your political standpoint a little bit. Some people would say, you know, giving extra revenue to a local government is a disadvantage because it allows for growth of government. But that aside, I think one potential disadvantage is to the residents is that if the assessed valuation of their home increases and the mill levy rate stays the same, they are going to pay a higher amount in taxes in the following year. Okay? So one thing that the debrucing would allow you to do as a district board is you could keep your mill levy rate at what it's at, say it's 25 mils, I forget exactly what it is, 27, somewhere on there. And you can keep your mill levy rate the same. So even if assessed valuations go up, you can still collect whatever you would collect on that same mill levy rate. So it could in some years result in residents paying more taxes. Now in some years they're going to pay less taxes because their assessed valuations fall. And Tabor has what's called a ratcheting down effect, because if there's a year where the assessed valuations of the homes and the commercial properties falls, if you have a spending limit in place, your spending limit in the next year is going to be based on the year where revenues were lower. And so it actually has an effect of actually making you reduce the mill levy rate over time, because anytime assessed valuations fall, the revenue falls, and the next year your limit is based on the prior year. But that's certainly one issue. I know that the legislature can adjust what the assessed valuation rate is right now. It's 7.15%. It's, they're planning to bring it back down next year. So that, that actually reduces the amount that the residents pay. But that's obviously completely outside your control.
Yeah.
Same thing with rates. By having this would allow you to raise rates. Right now, your water and sewer are in enterprises, so you can raise rates, and you do not need to have voter approval, and that's not subject to a spending limit. If your board wanted to raise rates on the golf course or the park rec center, that would result in exceeding that spending limit, they would have the ability to do so, because that rates are not required to have prior voter approval. So that's the other thing that it does, is it takes out by taking out the overall spending cap, it gives the board more discretion to set rates.
Thank you. I got one last question, then I'm gonna get off my soapbox. This is probably gonna be more directed towards you, because I don't think Carolyn has. Do you have any idea right now, roughly, how much money we're going to be over because the golf course and the campgrounds made so much money in 2020?
I do. So we are like right in the middle of doing, actually not in the middle, probably 90% of the way through the write-up on your financial statements. And so that involves these calculations. And our projection so far looks like it's gonna come in at roughly 270,000. So for frame of reference, you know, last year we had an overage, I think it was in the ballpark of about 35,000.
Oh, yeah. That's our water well, that's a lot of improvements.
So 270,000, and to kind of put it into perspective, your general fund revenues in total for 2020 look like they're going to be about 1.4 million. So that's not quite 20% of the general fund revenue. The budget you approved for 2021.
And Sam, what amount of that is from the golf course?
About, I didn't bring that detail with me, Carolyn, but I think about 120,000 of that is from the golf course. So about half of it.
I could go back and research that question of whether we can make an enterprise status as of 2020, if that's something you guys would like me to do and report back to you about my legal conclusions on that. Because that is a lot of money, and, you know, if you were operating, what you would have to establish is that you were basically operating as an enterprise, and you're just declaring it now, but that it was self-sustaining, that the funds were kept separately and it was operated as a government-owned business. So if we can establish that as of 2020, we may be able to retroactively declare that as an enterprise. So I can report back to you on that if that's what you're interested in.
I can't speak for the board, but I know this board member would be very interested. But we'll have to decide that as a board.
Yeah, I think that first we need to kind of make the decision on
But,
the table and the enterprise.
but in the same sense of that, that's only half of it.
It is only half of it,
Yeah.
but half of it's better than nothing.
I know, and I understand that.
Let's continue on with the question. Yeah,
Yes. So that's really the end of my questions. If anybody else has got some,
Harry, do you have a question?
So if we detaber, or put it in front of the people to detaber, then the 265,000, whatever it is, we'd be able to not have to turn back to the county.
Well, yeah, depending on how that question was framed, I assume it would be drafted so that it would be for 2020 forward, and if that were the case, which I assume it would be, and it would pass, then this excess revenue issue would go away.
but
That is correct, and that's how I drafted the question that is in the draft resolution that's part of your board packet.
oh, I just want to clarify real quick. It's only if it passes.
That's right.
I hate putting all my eggs in one basket.
So, I have a question, but hopefully Carolyn can hear this question. But it's kind of a part B to the question you have before you on, can you move this to an enterprise in 2020? And if the answer is no, then the part B is irrelevant. But if the answer is yes, then my question is, how late in the next year can that be done?
If the answer is yes, I don't think that there's any deadline as to how late in the year that needs to be done. It's clear that you can amend a budget after the year, so you could go back now and amend, or in December and amend the budget for 2020. I think it would be, you would want to likely do that before you completed your audit, and I'll let Sam speak to that piece.
Yeah, I mean, so, the audit has to be submitted to the state auditor's office by the end of September. And we can't get an extension beyond September 30th. So what the remedy is under the law is the state auditor has the authority to direct the county treasurer to withhold property tax collections to the local government until they receive the audit. So we kind of have to do something so it can be filed with the state auditor's office by the end of September.
So if I may real quick.
Harry, do you have anything else? Okay, go ahead.
So we already started the process, the 30-day process for putting the golf course and for that matter, putting the campgrounds in enterprise. So the 30 days is actually coming to an end here pretty quick, where we're gonna have to make a decision. So I think we could get it done, because we shouldn't have to go through another 30-day review, because we've already started. So I think we can get it done before you get the deadline, if Carolyn tells us we can do it.
Terry, do you have any questions?
No.
Bob?
Yes. I'd like to speak on this for a little bit.
Question? You go to, any questions of Carolyn?
Okay. You mentioned depreciation in the enterprise not being counted if we were to put the golf course in. What do you mean by that?
Well, in our governmental funds, so the general fund, say specifically, we don't record depreciation in that fund. Its basis of accounting is different than an enterprise. In an enterprise, then since the idea is that it's, to function as what looks like a standalone business of sorts, then all of the assets and all of the liabilities, both associated with that activity, should be reflected on the enterprise financial statements, including depreciation expense.
Currently, from the documents I've received, depreciation of approximately $34,000, $39,000, something in that neighborhood, has been logged to the golf course.
It may be, let me see if I can explain this. That depreciation is recognized only in the conversion from your governmental fund types to the government-wide financial statements. So in that process, it is recognized, but in the individual funds, it is not. So if we move this to an enterprise, any activity, then any assets, and like I say, liabilities as well, if they exist, would go along with it, and that depreciation would be reflected there.
I hear you say that, but I've seen the budget and I've seen the documents, and we've got depreciation logged there. We have depreciation logged for this office. We have depreciation throughout.
Yes,
the
what I'm
government
trying
side.
to explain is, if you look at the general fund alone, you will not see a factor for depreciation there. Look in the financial statements, there is no factor for depreciation.
Then why is
Doesn't
it
matter
broken out
when you
in the
budget.
Then why is it broken out in the categories?
Well, because when we do a conversion from the governmental fund financial statements to the government-wide financial statements, we have, in effect, convert to full accrual basis accounting. And in that process, the government-wide financials reflect all the long-term assets as well as liabilities, and an element for depreciation as well. In the government-wide financials only, not in the general fund. So it's that conversion, and I realize it can get a little confusing, but if you would contrast that with the water and sewer funds, which are enterprises, the financial statements there do reflect the assets and liabilities attributable to those enterprises, as well as a depreciation factor recorded directly in that fund, not as a part of any conversion to the government one. So it may seem like a subtle difference, and I didn't mean to say that it was not something that was determinable, but it would look different than the present financial statements.
Okay. You mentioned, and I think Carolyn mentioned as well, that if you miss your 10% or whatever, you go over, then you no longer qualify as an enterprise. Now that used to be 3 years. When did that change?
I'm not aware of any 3-year.
I've asked this in the past many times,
Yeah,
and
I
was
don't-
told that if
Could
you
be.
bust your budget 3 years in a row, then you would no longer be an enterprise. You'd have to move. As a matter of fact, they removed it from enterprise because of that in 2012.
I don't know what they did in 2012 or what the data was at the
So
time.
you're saying that
What I'm
if you
saying
lost your
is-
budget 1 year, you're out of enterprise?
No, I don't
Okay.
know what you mean exactly by bust the budget. But if you're referring to the 10% limitation that Carolyn was
Yes.
explaining earlier, that's on a year-to-year basis. I'm not aware of any rule that says you have to fail it for 3 years in a row before it applies.
Okay, so if the water plant or sewer plant, quote, bust the budget by their 10% this year, they're no longer enterprise, correct?
It's possible, yes. But I want to be clear on this phrase, bust the budget, because if we're talking about revenue sources that count against the 10%, then, and that's exceeded, then yes, we may not qualify as an enterprise for that year. But if we're talking about bust the budget, we might be talking about we have spending in excess of appropriated amounts. That has no bearing on that determination.
Is there appropriated amounts in an enterprise?
Appropriated amounts is what all of you, our board approves in the budget, the initial budget and any amendments thereto.
Okay. And if we receive bonds, you don't have to go before the public for any bonds that you're doing within an enterprise, correct?
If they're revenue bonds, and so that's what Carolyn was describing, and typically how they're, the plain English language description is, what we're doing is pledging the net revenue stream of that enterprise to service the debt. And so, since we're pledging only the revenue stream of that enterprise and not any general revenues of the district, that can be done within an enterprise potentially. That is not necessarily an automatic, because we have to be able to have financial statements that would support the issuance of that debt. So, bond people don't necessarily have the ability to sell those if the revenue streams won't support the debt service. So it's not necessarily automatic, but you can issue revenue bonds in an enterprise without a vote, because we're not asking the voters to, for example, in a general obligation bond, we're typically asking them to issue bonds that generate cash to provide for some project, many times, usually a capital spending project. And we're also, at the same time, asking them if we can establish a mill levy necessary to raise the property taxes that will be required to make the debt service payments. So those kinds of bonds, we always have to ask the voters for approval.
So if we create or want to create a bond to build an addition to the water plant, does that go in front of the voters, or is that because it's in the enterprise, we tie the income of the enterprise to that bond?
We typically would try to tie the income of the enterprise to that bond, but our ability to actually issue that would be based upon the net revenue stream of that enterprise being sufficient to support the debt service.
So in the same sense, if we decided to get a bond for $500,000 to improve the campgrounds, does that go before the voters, or is that again tied to the revenue stream?
It could be if the revenue stream was sufficient to support the debt service and it were in an enterprise. But if it requires other revenues, so in other words, the revenue stream alone would not be sufficient, then revenue bonds will not work.
Correct. Okay. Back to, you had mentioned rates. I think Carolyn touched on this as well, but I believe you said something about we have to setting the rates is different between whether or not it's a government entity and whether or not it's a enterprise. For instance, we set the water rates, We also set the rates in the campground and the golf course. The board does that every year.
Yes. There,
So what
there is a
changes?
difference, and here's what the difference is. Think of, first of all, in the enterprise, the water and sewer funds, we have revenue bonds outstanding. So within those revenue bonds, we have covenants. In other words, there's financial covenants that we have to satisfy. And those financial covenants, there's sometimes several, but one of the ones that's always in play is some multiple of the debt service being, the revenue being sufficient to satisfy some multiple of the debt service. Usually, the bonds will require that if we fail that test or think we're going to fail it, it requires the board to take action so that we will satisfy it. That could be done in the form of rate increases. So that's different than if it's outside an enterprise. And I think I heard Carolyn say one of the differences in if we de-Bruce or not. If we de-Bruce, then we don't have the excess revenue problem. You can adjust those rates, golf course or otherwise, in your own good judgment. And if we have excess revenue, increasing the rates from a non-exempt source would simply serve to increase the potential refund.
But if I'm understanding you correctly, that is only activated by a covenant of bond, not anything to do with it just being an enterprise.
Well, no, true. Typically, the financial covenant is included in the bond document. So if we didn't have outstanding bonds, then we likely wouldn't have that problem.
Without outstanding bonds, that wouldn't apply because there's no bond covenant upon the rates at this point.
If it were in an enterprise?
Yeah.
If we were in a qualifying enterprise and we were below this 10% threshold that we've been talking about, and we adjusted rates, then it would be exempt. So in other words, you could adjust the rates upward. If that would produce more revenue, fine. If it didn't, fine as well. There would be no bond covenant that we failed.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
Jim?
Sam, with this too, do you see that there should be a limit of revenue? I know we have, like our CCAC, they charge a fee. It goes against our tax base and stuff like that. So, whether it be the CCAC, is there kind of a limit that you would think that would be optimal to make it an enterprise over not?
Well, I think you have to look at not necessarily a dollar amount, but the activity itself, and the costs associated with it. With the exception of the golf course, most of our park and rec activity, we balance the budget, so to speak, by allocating a slice of our property tax revenue to that particular function. So if those activities are required to be supported by that general revenue, they may not satisfy this enterprise test.
Anything else, Jeff?
Well, because even like in our roads fund, our roads fund is government, it isn't an enterprise. We also have a property fund that is government, and then we also have one that's an enterprise. So any of that revenue coming in of the sale of lots and stuff that is over and above what our depreciation is, then that becomes...
Yeah, all these activities, it gets complicated because just take the sale of property, for example. I don't see that as being an issue because even the property sales taking place in the general fund are excluded from the Tabor base. So sale of district assets don't have to be counted as part of the revenue base or the excess revenue. So that is not causing that problem.
And the other add one more question. The other thing is you still have to do your Tabor rate, whether we're debruced or not, to get that 3%, which we have to keep in reserve, right?
Yes, you still have to do that, although, the enterprise, for example, water and sewer that have been in enterprise status don't calculate a 3% Tabor reserve there. So anything that's in a qualifying enterprise below this 10% would not have to satisfy that 3% reserve requirement. But outside that, even the debrucing will not eliminate our requirement to maintain a 3% reserve for these non-exempt sources.
Mr. Chairman, I came up with a question.
Sure.
Besides what is the meaning of life. So, am I understanding this right, that number one, other than paperwork, there's no costs associated with going, whether you go to an enterprise or a government area? There's no, you have to pay $7,500 application fee, or you have to do this, or you have to do that financially. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of. And you've
So-
got professional fees to try to follow all these rules,
Sure.
but outside of that, I'm not
Which we have.
aware of any application fee, no.
I'm
So,
getting
if
shake
that-
the head from Carolyn.
So if that is the case, what is to prevent the board from bringing Sam back every July or every August and giving him that nice soft chair and deciding what is best in each of those areas for the taxpayers, retroactive to January 1?
So the question also becomes, can you go back and forth as many times as you want to?
I think that's a question that's gonna fall in Carolyn's domain, although I can tell you from some years of experience, I've never seen any other entity I can recall just, elect to go in or out on an annual basis. I don't know that I've thought through all the financial reporting issues that would go along with that.
Carolyn, can you speak to that?
Is there any limit that would limit how many times you can go in and out? I agree with Sam that it's not common. I think what you'd want to do is look at each fund, find funds that you think are more often than not, going to meet the requirement and not be over the 10%. Because you as a board do have to make a determination when you pass the enterprise resolution that this is going to be, this fund is going to be operated as a government-owned business going forward. So you want to be pretty confident, but yes, you could look at each of those funds. You could look at the CNCC, definitely. You could look at the roads. You could look at the rec center and see if the rec center makes enough money to be considered in that. Now, each one you put into an enterprise, it reduces your spending limit because then that revenue from that source is no longer included in your spending limit. Then you have, you look at your spending limit for the following year and everything other than those items that have been moved into the enterprise. So my recommendation would be to find funds that you think are going to meet the requirements of enterprises. And then if they did not for 1 year, you would not have to take an official action to say, I de-enterprise you. It would automatically happen. If an enterprise received more than 10% of their funds that were not eligible for that counted from the 10% limit, which would be, does not include federal grants, for instance. So it only includes state and local funds. And then if there were a year where it did not meet that requirement, it would automatically be de-enterprised, and then that would come up during the audit purpose, but you wouldn't have to take an official action to terminate the enterprise, because the hope would be that in the following year, it would get back into enterprise status.
Anything else, Terry?
O'Neill?
Go ahead.
How many other districts right now are not detabled for just this revenue part?
That's really hard to know because there are so many districts, and what we're happening is, most of the metropolitan districts being organized today are for specific development. They're going to pay for the water and sewer infrastructure and the roads and the additional infrastructure for development. So what you're happening right now is you'll have developers come in, maybe organize 10 metro districts for the same piece of property, debrief all of them in that initial election, and then they'll be debriefed going forward. So I would say any of those developer districts will automatically include the debriefing question in their initial election. So all of those will be debriefs. Of districts that are your situation, that are established districts, DOLA just doesn't separate out those numbers for us to see, how many of the established districts are debriefs. So I did find an article that said municipalities, 230 out of 270 were debriefs as of 2019. So that was the closest analogy I could find. So I would say the vast majority of local governments are debriefed.
230 out of 270?
That's municipalities.
That's
Yeah.
correct.
So I have a question then, I guess for both of you. What do you recommend?
Mr. Chairman, I call for a point of order. I think that's out of line.
I don't know why. Would you be willing to give us a recommendation?
Well,
Sure. Dan, you want to go first?
yeah, if you want.
Well, give you a legal recommendation for legal advice, but this comes down to a policy decision. Bob is correct in that viewpoint, and I think Sam's recommendation would be what would he recommend from an accounting standpoint, and there is still ultimately a policy decision. So it's up to you guys if you want us to give you our professional recommendations, but it's going to be, as I said, there's pros and cons, so it comes down to a policy decision as well for you guys.
Okay. Well, I agree with Carolyn. The policy decision always rests with the board. So we do our best to try to tell you what your alternatives are. And I'm not sure exactly, what problems you perceive in the whole scenario that you're trying to address. I kind of feel like if the top of the list is this discussion that we've had the last couple of years about the excess revenue, then the most effective way to eliminate that would be a successful debruising. But we've tried that before and it hasn't passed. My recollection is the last time it was pretty close, but it still didn't pass. It is possible, I suppose, that if that kind of an election were to fail, you still could reconsider the enterprise. I'm a little bit less sure of all these little pockets of revenue that you think are enterprise, because I think a lot of these activities, the costs equal or exceed the revenue we're generating, and they cannot exist without, a slice of some general revenue, probably property tax. So the golf course is the most obvious one. I also feel like that should require some study. We're looking at that golf course based on the most recent years. So 19 and 20 for sure were pretty good years. And 19, we really didn't have all the cost structure in place. We didn't have a superintendent for part of the year, as I recall. But we can't operate without a superintendent for too long. 20, our revenue stream was enhanced greatly by the COVID and all that stuff. So I don't know if that's sustainable over a long period. But a general debruising would eliminate that. It would then, I think, be left to you to decide whether or not moving a golf course or some other activity such as that would be beneficial for the other reasons that Carolyn outlined so well.
Thank you. Josh, you had something?
Yes. If the campground were to be placed into an enterprise, can that enterprise help support Parks and Rec financially? And if so, is there a limit to how much it can?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, it seems like nobody's gonna answer. Parks and Rec stays Parks and Rec, and the enterprise would be separate. The enterprise, the board then has the discretion at the end of the year, if the, enterprise has excess funds, to move it to wherever they need to move it.
So yes,
But not till the end of the year.
but not till the end of the year.
Jim?
One of the questions I had was, well, kind of a statement, and I know the biggest thing that I seen with the golf course last year with COVID is you had Denver courses closed, Springs courses closed. Those people came down here to play. That's fees, that I don't forecast seeing as much of it in the future here. Yeah, it was an exceptional year for us. But in the same aspect of it, you know, it's like when I first came here, I said I need to see the data for 3 years to say, okay, whether we're going, which we did the first year, we gained 30,000, I think it was 45,000, something like that. Last year, we were at the 120s stage. This year, I'm looking at the financials, we're at that point of you're probably gonna break even. You might make a few dollars, but you know, as for a trend, I'm just concerned as that aspect. But no, I'll go either way the board wants and chooses. I think having both plans in place would be beneficial.
Well, I have them in front of us. Can I ask a question, please? So, regarding the Jim there statement, we put it into enterprise right now, and Karen tells us we can put it back to 2020, which would be awesome. Okay, and the golf course doesn't make much money next year. Okay, actually loses some money, goes over the 10%, where we've got to fund it from government, then it just comes out of enterprise, correct?
Yeah.
No foul, no harm.
If it fails that 10% test, that would be true. Fails that
And-
10% test.
And does it affect anything previous to that?
No, except I think if you take it out or put it in, whichever way it goes, you have to adjust the revenue and spending base. Okay, so for example, the 2020 revenue and spending base was determined including the golf course, okay, because it was based on 19's results.
Yes.
So if we're saying the golf course is not an enterprise effective January 1st of 2020, then I have to go back and recalculate the spending limit, revenue and spending limit for 2020, excluding the golf course activity for 2019. Okay, so that would have to be recomputed.
Recomputed.
Yes.
But it would still come out to, if I'm understanding you correctly, it would come out to the district's advantage if that was the case, because it would be about 120 grand roughly.
I think about the 270 I told you I thought
Yes.
it was looking like we would be over. I think about half of that is attributable to the golf course.
Thank you.
Question. What does the grants we get from the county, does that come as revenue?
It does come as revenue.
So, the voters approved a partial debrucing in 2019 that allowed the district to keep any revenue from grants or funds from state or local governments and have that not count towards the spending limit. So, one of the exceptions under the spending limit is where your voters have approved allowing you to use extra revenue. So your voters have already allowed you to keep that extra revenue from any grants, so that does not count towards your spending limit. And that's in perpetuity. And so I was going to mention that's another option on the table is there are options that are short of a general degreasing. Okay? So one option is you can refer a question to your electors to just say, can we keep the extra $270,000 from last year? That's absolutely fine. So we could just say, can we keep the overage from 2020? Or you could say, can we keep the overage from 2020 and 2021? Or you could say for 5 years. These are all options that you could consider. You could also say, can we keep the overage from the golf course? So that would be another way is to ask them to keep an overage from a specific purpose. But any of those are valid questions as well.
True. And the money from the grants this year from the county was mostly, if not mostly, I think nearly all from lottery funds, which would be excluded anyway.
Okay, anybody else have any more questions?
So
Go ahead.
on the question of 2021, I can get back to you, I can call your bond attorney tomorrow and get back to you on that. I think, the problem is you guys, you have to make a decision today because you have to refer a ballot question. The ballot question needs to be certified by September 3rd. So you either need to make a decision to whether to adopt that election resolution today or continue the meeting. But I know that I have had districts pass a resolution that said we have been operating as an enterprise, we will continue to operate as an enterprise. So I think even there actually might be a pretty good chance that you could do that to say you were in fact operating as an enterprise in 2020, even though you had not declared it that yet. But it was, if you weren't committing funds, they were, collecting all our funds, and you're basically operating as a company business already. So I'm hopeful that will be the conclusion of the outcome. But sorry, I can't give it a bit in advance on that today.
We do need to make a decision not on the ballot issue. But I think it would be good, I think we all agree, that to have Carolyn check on that to make sure that we can go back to. Okay, we would appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, well then.
Okay, let's move on to the resolutions, number 2, Jim.
Okay, I have resolution 10-2021, referring to the ballot issue detailer. Carolyn had set up the resolution, with the question being, without creating any new tax or increasing any property tax rates unless separately approved by the voters, shall Colorado City Metropolitan District be authorized to collect, retain, and spend all revenues it receives from all sources in fiscal year 2020 and thereafter as a voter-approved revenue change, and a exception to the limit that would otherwise apply under the Article 10, Section 20 of the Colorado statute, the 5.5% property tax revenue limitation set forth in Section 29-1, 3-301 of the Colorado revised statute or any other law. That would be the question that we, if the resolution passed. Or, like Carolyn said, she can change it to match what the board would be playing.
Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak on this.
Go ahead.
At the last meeting, I voted against this, and I'm still opposed to, quote, degluing, because we haven't even attempted other options. At this point, it's been shot down multiple times. I think it's a bad way to go until we at least try something else. I am all for the enterprises. As for the golf course, it was an enterprise until 12, when previous boards took it out because it couldn't maintain. I would also point out that just with simply a management change. It has become a more profitable business. And on top of that, now, even Pueblo West is an enterprise in their golf course. Now, if you want to compare Metro to Metro, those are Metros. Theirs is an enterprise. I can't compare Walsenburg or Pueblo because those aren't enterprise or aren't Metros. So again, I think that this resolution should be voted no and just move forward with no accounting and do our best. Thank you, I yield.
Barry?
I disagree with that. I think the people in this community, if we explained it right and got out there and talked to these people, they would pass the Brucey. I don't know if you're aware of that, but after the last board meeting, Mr. Cook's always so adamant on having official business and records, and he went on Facebook and gave notes about the board meeting, and he said some very
point of order.
he said some very derogatory things
Harry, that's,
about board members.
Mr. Chairman,
that's an attack.
Well, you need to look at
Mr.
that.
Chairman,
I don't, we can't allow that.
Okay, you need to look at it though, sir.
One of the things that I look at in all of this is that I think the community, if we get outside money into the community, we should be able to keep it. And that's where I believe your golf course, your campground, that is not people that are here all the time. They are. We do give breaks to our community as memberships, things like that to make up for it. But those people that come and play here once or twice a year, that is money that is revenue that is brought from outside the community. I feel that, you know, yes, the golf course we have not put $1 into the golf course from tax money for the last 2 years. It has been self-maintaining. But is it gonna go that way on? I have a crystal ball, but I can't tell you, it won't tell you.
Mr. Chairman. So I actually support both, simply because I hate having all my eggs in one basket. I've never played life that way. I think we should try to de-taper. Since it leaves the voter protection, that was one of the biggest concerns that I had, was no future boards can raise mill levies or anything else without voter approval. That stays intact. And then the other thing is right now, we are looking at giving back 270 grand when we've got about $10 million worth of projects that we've got to get done. That we're asking the county for money for, where, you know, there's a well that Director Cook has been pushing for, that's gonna cost us $70,000 or so. That's probably gonna have to be put on hold if we've got to give back the $270,000. That's a water source that the community needs, quite frankly. I support it, and I don't want all my eggs in one basket. I want to put the golf course in enterprise for sure. I'm not sure about the campgrounds, but I definitely want to put the golf course in enterprise. And if we can do it back to 2020, then we're covered there for the golf course part, which is about half the money. And I also want to put the issue on the table, because there's nothing wrong with asking the people of Colorado City, do you want to do this or not? Because it's not our choice, it's theirs.
Barry?
Thank you.
Well, I also kind of take that position. I am firmly, as Carolyn says, part of this politically, I am firmly in favor of Tabor at the state level. But I am not in favor of Tabor at the local level. I'm afraid that constricts the local governments too much. So it goes against my political being of hating taxes, but I think we need to be able to control our own destiny, and this is the purest form of government right here from the local level. So I also agree with Mr. Collins that we probably ought to do both. I don't see any downside of doing both. What we have to decide immediately is this ballot issue. We probably have a bit more time on the enterprise issue, but we need to decide on this ballot issue. Let's move on, yeah.
Okay, next, we have a public hearing on the, later on for the Greenhorn Mountain Campground and Enterprise, and I believe we've discussed all of this with all the topics that we've got with here.
I think so. Does anybody have any, I mean, we really have gone into this, we don't need to just keep rehashing it. Does anybody have any?
Mr. Chairman, I'm curious why Josh asked the question.
Josh, go ahead.
You're curious as what?
I'm curious about your question about if you just put the campground as an enterprise, being able to move any of it, do you fear that you're gonna be greatly underfunded with all the other parts of rec if the campground's pulled out?
I do. We're gonna compare metro districts to metro districts. Most parks and rec districts have a parks and rec director, a recreation director, an administrator of some sort. I'm doing all three of those, plus being a campground manager. The easiest revenue I saw when I started this was the campground. Cost the people of Colorado City nothing to bring in more revenue. We've added pieces of equipment, machinery that's helped with manpower hours. I don't see the benefit of having a $500,000 campground sitting there, $1 million campground, whatever you want to call it, if it's not helping everything else.
Thank you.
May I ask a question, please, of the auditor? So, I understand where Josh is coming from, but if I am, please tell me if I'm mistaken. But by taking the campground out of enterprise, it will not affect the dollars going to Parks and Rec as far as money from the government going to the rest of Parks and Rec in any form or fashion, will it?
Well, I'm not sure that I can answer that, because I think part of his point is you have not only staff, but maybe other expenses that are covering sort of a broad spectrum of activities, not just the campground. So I guess it's possible, depending on how that was structured, the campground should bear its proportionate share of any of those costs.
Yes.
So would that serve to benefit or detract from the other activities? I'm not sure of that answer, frankly. Most all the other Parks and Rec activities, as you know, are supported at least a little, and in some cases by a lot, of general property tax revenue. So none of those activities are probably going to qualify as an enterprise because of the 10% rule.
Yeah, and I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't think any of us board members would want to put any of the other activities in an enterprise. But my whole purpose of suggesting about putting the campground in enterprise was to isolate the income that we're making there so that we can actually use it in other areas. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the enterprise makes a profit at the end of the year, we can take all that profit if we want and move it to anywhere we want. We can move it to the pool, we can move it to anywhere we want, correct?
Well, that's a maybe, and that would depend on if the sources of revenue associated with that activity are all unrestricted, then potentially we could do that.
So if it's in an enterprise, it would be unrestricted though, right?
Unless the funding source restricted it. Okay, so, but some of those restrictions are going to be from sources that don't count against that limit. So for instance, if I made a donation of $1,000 and said I want you to use this for the campground, we'll leave it to Josh's good judgment what he wants to spend it on. then if you accept that donation, it has to be used for campground expenditures. It cannot be redirected to another activity.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, I might be, I'm not real sure, but I mean, one of the concerns of it is if we set this aside, but we don't intend to use any residual funds to continue to maintain that activity, that almost sounds to me like it's more general government, frankly. So for example, the campground, if it makes a profit, but we take all the money to subsidize things that don't make a profit, then we may leave the campground underfunded.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just using that, I do apologize, I'm just using that as because I don't think Josh would do something like that, or the board would do something like that. But I think what his concern is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, is you're worried that the other activities are gonna suffer.
Yes.
If your campground, which I think is gonna be opposite, I think your other activities are actually gonna prosper. Because less of that money is being limited by Tabor.
Perhaps.
I think what he's getting at is he's worried about losing his float. He's got this extra pot of money over here. As long as it stays there, he can use it wherever he wants. Whereas if it's in enterprise, he can't use it wherever he wants. The board then dulls it and tells him where to use it.
Let's move on.
General money can be transferred from an enterprise to the general fund. There is not a restriction like the 10% restriction. No, there's no 10% restriction on moving money from enterprise to a general fund. So you have to speak to the accounting of that, but I think that would be a fund transfer if there's extra money in that fund. If you had issued revenue bonds to that fund, then maybe that would have some restrictions on how much you had to keep in that fund. But there's not a general legal restriction that I'm transferring money in that direction.
Yeah. As long as the original source of the funds was not restricted. That would be true. Yes.
And all the source of the funds, I believe, from the campgrounds are fees, correct?
Yeah, they're not restricted.
Property tax.
So they shouldn't be restricted, everything from the
Not
campgrounds.
So there's no bonds to come over
Yeah.
that.
Not at this point, no.
Let's move on, Jim.
Okay, CAC review, Bob Smith did go out and look at property on Wednesday. Thursday, there was nobody in the meeting. He had a doctor's appointment. Randy was busy doing something else, so there was a couple of them that Bob had said that they didn't have it marked out. And Harry was able to go with me and check that they did, because they called me back on Friday after Bob had talked to him and said, well, we'll re-straighten them out. So I went out to see Saturday whether they were, as I was driving around, I noticed that they had moved stakes around. So Harry went out and helped me review those for the properties that were building houses.
So when we get to the action part of this, we'll have to go through them individually as far as recommendations.
No, because all of them were okay
Okay.
at that point because of, they had moved, did the adjustments that were recommended.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak? I don't see any notes on here as to zoning for each one per covenant and per county.
Okay. How do you do it?
So if we check them, we kind of need to know whether or not they're zoned properly.
They were all in R1s, I can tell you that.
Per covenant.
And met the space requirements.
So you verified that they are
Yes.
R1 under covenants.
And I have a check off list that Bob has now that he goes through all of that, if you wanna see that.
So when you checked these houses, how many of the original complaints did you check?
We didn't check any because I didn't have anybody here.
Okay, so we're back to picking and choosing only one category of covenants for review?
After the last meeting, I was told that this shouldn't be my job. But I'm trying to keep the district going forward in a sense that I do get regional building asking if this is approved or not. So I have to look at it at that aspect as, okay, do we approve it or do we don't? And are we gonna hold up building all of that?
So you're saying you
I'm not saying that
only checked buildings, you did not check any other covenant that's on the list?
I did check one other one that was a complaint.
So you checked a complaint. What number was that complaint?
I don't think it was on there because nobody was here, Bob, to do the complaint form on it.
So if it's not on the list, how did it get on your
Because
list?
if you look in in section 9, I received a letter 3 days in a row about a fifth wheel, and I figured it was a concern that needed to be looked at and understand why. Because it was sitting on one of our roads.
And when we went past the properties the other day, looking at the ones we had to look at, he took me past where that fifth wheel setting, and if my knowledge is correct, the man is parked there with approval by the neighbors, and it's also parked there because he has a guy come in to regrade some things, and it's on the end of the cul-de-sac, and it's not hurting anybody, it's just sitting there, it's not being used. And you didn't want to put it where it's supposed to be until the grading's done at that property. And I thought this was, we're not a Gestapo. We're here to help people do things. And I think we need to look at things in a positive manner and not be picky about things that aren't really relevant.
So have you chosen not to enforce any covenant other than buildings?
The committee didn't meet.
I thought after the last meeting,
The board didn't vote on anything at the last meeting.
I know, that's what I'm saying, the board, if I don't have a committee to make a recommendation to the board is the one, becomes the committee now. So you guys should be the ones out checking and reviewing it then, from what I understood, as to what was being said.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Go ahead.
Because of everything we got going on with water, sewer, our recent emergency, we've tasked our city manager, he's currently working with the county to get us funds, hopefully out of some of this money that's came down, to fix a lot of these problems. He's working diligently to do that. We are currently understaffed. We have volunteers that, I mean, I appreciate all the volunteers, but they've got their own personal life, and apparently they're having a hard time getting to this other stuff. I wonder if we shouldn't suspend these functions until we get out of this, I don't want to say state of emergency, but till we get out of this this problem that we're in right now with low manpower and trying to take care of some of these problems that we have incurred here recently, and trying to keep it from happening again. We should possibly suspend these activities for now. Suspend the whole lot. We can bring it back once we get taken care of. Go ahead.
Adding to that, it is not just the county, I'm dealing with state, I'm dealing with federal, grants too that we're working through, so that way I have not all my eggs in one basket. And I know Yvonne and I have a meeting on next Thursday with the state. I had a meeting with Neil and Rural Water today for about an hour and a half that he's given us grant writers to contact and stuff that looking at other options. So, you know, it is a lot that we're trying to get done in a short amount of time because I need to have them tanks done before 2023, which that, you seen how fast 2021 went by. You know, and I'm sorry, I'm at that point where I'm frustrated with CCAC. I wish I had the time to put into it, but I think to make that job what everybody's expecting it to be, it's gonna take probably 60% of my time to do that job.
Okay, I think we're getting
Mr.
off
Chairman, I
topic.
need to respond to this, please.
I think, hold on, Bob. I think we need to get off topic. I think that, we need to, address to your comment about, suspending this. If we're going to take action on bills, we also have to we can't pick and choose which covenants we're going to enforce. And so the bills are part of the covenant system. So we can't not take, at least review the complaints that come in if we're also going to accept applications.
So if we suspend it, it will go back to exactly the way it was before we started it. For several years, the building department was taking care of issuing permits and we had no say-so because there was no architectural control committee. So my suggestion would be we just suspend it until we're able to get caught up and get enough volunteers, because maybe this will bring in some more volunteers. Maybe people will realize that we need more volunteers if we're gonna do this. Because that's what we need, is more volunteers. But I would suggest suspending all of it, letting county take care of building permits until we're able to get caught up, get the volunteers that we need.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address Carolyn on this as well. This has nothing to do with the last 6 months. It's been going on for 3 years now. You make all the excuses you want, but it's not because of the last 6 months. Now, the covenants required, when I first sat on this board, that the board appoint a committee. The board refused to do that and made themselves the committee. So they took on the burden of this. The covenants require that the board take action. The board has now taken action to make themselves this, and now you're saying you don't want the job that you've taken on.
Okay,
Ms. Carolyn, how do we go about, the covenants require us to appoint a committee. We appointed ourselves. Now how do we satisfy the covenants if we suspend everything?
Okay, so first item is that I believe that the design approval and the design review and the covenant enforcement are 2 separate tasks. So if you feel that you do not have the staff capability at this time to do both, you could suspend both, or you could say, you know what, we're going to take a 2-month hiatus on the covenant enforcement. We are still going to do the design review.
Ms. Carolyn, please
Don't
point to
but
where in the covenants that there is a separation between review and enforcement. I don't mind it.
I'm going to look up your covenants right now, but I do know that is very, very, I mean, they're just considered 2 separate functions, and design review and covenant control are 2 separate functions. So there is, look at what it says about design review, and I think that there is a separate section. Now you have obviously different covenants for each different section, but let's see, file and define the section that talks about design review.
So Carolyn, I'm gonna interrupt here for just a sec. Sam, we appreciate you being here as far as you after having to extend yourself here for the rest of the meeting. You don't. You're sure welcome. We'd love to have you here.
The rumor about coffee and cookies is just.
There's no coffee and cookies.
And when I told you dinner after the meeting, they're gonna probably be closed.
You're sure welcome to stay, but you don't have to.
I appreciate that comment. It's actually been informative, so
You're welcome to stay for more
I'm
informative.
gonna hear a little bit more before I leave, if you don't mind.
You're absolutely welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excuse me for interrupting, Carolyn.
All right, let's see, so, where's the enforcement section? So, well, so another, to answer the question, another way to get out of this is to go back to having a separate, separate property owners, or separate, a separate covenant control committee. That's absolutely possible to go back to, so those are two options. Is you could go back to having a separate covenant control committee and have that not be directly under the district's powers, appointing members to that. Or another option is to have a committee that reports to you. So those are two ways to delegate the powers. If you're in an emergency or even short of emergency, if you're in a situation where you do not have the staff ability to enforce these right now, and you make a decision that you're going to not enforce your covenants for 60 days, 90 days, I think that is a decision that you can make, and then come back to enforcing them when you have the capability. But yeah, I agree that it's very important to have a procedure as to whether we're going to enforce them or we're not, and then try to follow that as consistently as possible. So I know the board has had a lot of back and forth about what this committee looks like and what process you want to follow for enforcing the covenants. I think we do not need to be enforced on a board basis. We do not need to have every decision go before the board. So one easy way to reduce this stress, at least on the board, is to delegate it to other folks. To reduce the stress on your staff, it would be delegating it to a committee.
Like we have.
Like you have a or committee under the district, yeah.
So if we suspend covenant enforcement, can we continue to approve or disapprove of new bills?
I believe you can, yes. They are two separate functions, the design review versus the covenant control. So under the design review, yes, you are reviewing whether they're consistent with the covenants, but you are not enforcing other violations of the covenants for that period of time.
And as I requested, where does it say that? The judge is going to ask the same question. Where do you get it?
Well, let me pull up the special district act that I think talks about covenant control and design review as two separate functions.
We have.
I think that those two separate functions together, but I believe that under the special district.
We have restrictive covenants we must follow unless we eliminate them. We personally cannot. Only the property owners can eliminate them. So therefore, I see no way to get around one covenant when they're both in the same paragraph.
Well, there's one reference to the architectural committee. Let's see, I'm looking at unit 4 at the moment.
Unit 20 is a good common one. It covers basically everything within the district.
Good. Thank you.
Send out letters and stuff.
Mr. Chairman, while the attorney's looking through this, I would ask this board to move on in the essence of time, because we're not to the voting section of this
We can
at this time.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Close the study session of the College City Metro District and open the regular meeting at 7.
Yeah, and when you do come back to me, I think I found the section.
Okay. If you join in, pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
See you, Sam. Thank you.
Parks
Thank
coming
you.
up.
Thank you, Sam, very much.
Good night, everyone.
Very helpful.
If you join in the minutes on the front, you so choose. Thank you. Quorum check. All the board members are present, we have a full quorum. And I guess as far as going back to Carolyn, in the interest of time, I think I'd like to back up just for Carolyn's sake. I mean, we can release her if she'd like. If we could back up to the discussion about the CCAC review before we go to public hearing. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. So the question was asked, is there a design review for covenant enforcement? And so I looked at right here, the Unit 20 Declaration of Protective Covenants, and there is a distinction in, it talks about, under section 7, no mobile home or structural accessory, that's no move in place without approval of an architectural committee. The architectural committee shall consider the location, exterior appearance, color, and of the accessory structure and material. So it is set forth in a separate section where it talks about this being an application made by the homeowner and their approval versus some of these others that are talking about, that are just general prohibitions that are kind of captured under the catch-all, where it talks about these can be enforced by proceedings in law and equity. So there is a separate section, at least setting forth at least in context of mobile homes and accessory structures in this particular protective covenants. It's going to depend on each protective covenant what the language is. There's also in here in the Special District Act, it talks about the board of the Metropolitan District has the power to furnish covenant enforcement and design review services. There lists as covenant enforcement and design review services as two separate types of services in one section, but
So in other words, just a different line, just a different number. So there is no separation in powers. That's just the way you want to read it as a lawyer.
I think that there is a distinction between that those are two different functions, so I see them as two different functions. So I think there would be a rational basis. Remember, if the board made a determination, this is a protected class where, the board needs to have a rational basis for supporting its decision. So if it, made the decision to focus on one type of covenant, which would be the design review for new builds, I think there's a very valid basis for making that distinction as opposed to other protective covenants.
You're full of it.
Okay.
That's not appropriate.
That may
That's
not
not
have been
appropriate.
appropriate,
Stop.
but anybody that
Stop.
wants to read one sentence out of it, I will continue. Now, we've all read the documents.
Why
There
would you
is
do-
no separation. What?
You've been asked to stop.
I understand you've asked me, and I'm not going to stop at this point. If you would like to,
Mr. Chairman, I
escort
move
me
that we
out,
ask
you're
Mr.
welcome to
Cook
do
to
that.
leave.
I'll second that.
This discussion is, I didn't hear, what was it?
I move we ask Mr. Cook to leave.
No, I'm not gonna do that, I'm gonna ask you to stop, or you will ask you to leave. Okay, let's move on. Okay, thank you, Carolyn. I think that explains it to us pretty well, and I,
Do you want me to stay on the call for when you get to the election? Are you gonna have any more additional questions or thoughts when we get to the election resolution?
do you have thoughts?
I have a question for Carolyn.
Go ahead.
Because we're talking about covenants, and you have in this packet in front of us, 2 board members, that own the board of another project, asking for approval of their project from themselves. That seems out of order, and along with that, the covenants clearly state, and you're welcome to look them up in units 1, 2, and 3, that the building in question was to be held for the use of future property owners, that they've chosen to sell and remove future property owners. What do you have on that?
I would need more information. I can't speak to that issue. I'm sorry, I'm not briefed on that issue to understand what the issue is. So I see you asking 2 questions. One, is it a conflict of interest where the board members need to disclose or recuse themselves from a vote? I don't have the facts to know what their interests are or whether that is actually coming up for a vote. We could discuss that issue if you want to provide more information. Or the second question, I'm not sure what the second question is this a properly permitted approval? And I do not have the facts to be able to speak to that issue right now.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you. I don't think we have any, anybody you think will have questions as we come up for the vote on Tabor?
I don't.
I
don't.
think so.
Okay. Okay, I don't think we'll have any more questions.
Thanks,
All
Carolyn.
right, have a great night.
Thank you.
Send me a text if you need me.
Good job on your report. I liked your report.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, let's move on into the public hearing. I close the the regular meeting and go to the public hearing with one thing on the agenda, the Greenhorn Mountain Campground to Enterprise.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to put the Greenhorn campground into enterprise.
This is
per
a-
resolution.
This is a public hearing, not an agenda action.
Yeah, not an action
I
item,
don't
it's a
think we
public
have any-
hearing.
Do we have any public input? None.
Josh, you have any input?
Nothing than what
No, but that-
other than what I've already said.
So with this enterprise, Josh, are you gonna get more manpower to help take care of that, or?
I close the public hearing, go back to the regular meeting. The board of directors of College City Metropolitan District, Tuesday, August 31st, at 7:43. Approval of the agenda.
So, should we add on the agenda? Because she was talking about, we're gonna need to get this done, we're gonna have to come back to a special meeting. Otherwise, about putting the golf course and his campgrounds in enterprise back to 2020, or just the golf course in
You know, I think
enterprise.
she's already written that in, or can write that to the final document. We have to approve what we're going to do, and then that will finalize that document.
But we gotta approve it back to 2020 if we're gonna approve it back to.
If you would like.
So you wanna add to the, we have campground on the agenda, you wanna add the golf course, that's basically.
Well, no, the golf course, we can't add until the 30 days is up.
You can talk about it
We
and
can
talk
talk
about
about
the, where you want to go with it, and instruct it be brought back that way, if that's what you're preferring.
But we've got the resolution for the campgrounds already on here, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Because the golf course, when's the 30 days up for the golf course?
The next meeting.
Is it next meeting?
Next meeting. Yeah.
So we'll have her report back if we can go back to, because the campgrounds isn't making a huge difference. I don't believe. Campgrounds wasn't making a huge difference at all.
Well, the golf course, it's probably gonna be,
Yeah, so.
it's probably gonna be 50 to 60 out of it.
Yeah, so never mind. I make a motion right now that we approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Moving second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Opposed. Okay. Approval of minutes.
There is a couple of mistakes. Wherever it says Mr. Alice, it should be Mr. Elliott. She got carried away.
I'm not the only one that messes that up.
So, we'll go back and redo those. The one on the special meeting, it was fixed and changed. But those two, for the study session on the 10th and the board meeting on the 10th, we'll have to go back and change those.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes with the said, name changes.
Sorry, Neil.
Yeah.
So we did put Mr.
I'll
Alice
also
as chair.
second
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Bills payable.
Don't have them this time.
Financial report.
You have that under your section 4, which is your clear.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion this time to table financial report because we didn't get them except for 6 hours before the meeting. No way to study them.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion. Okay, my discussion is, need financial reports. They need to be done for our meetings. We have them here. What you're saying is that you want to study them.
I have no time to look them over.
I got no problem with his complaint.
Okay, we're working on that issue right now.
Let's, I will.
Yesterday was
It's been made a motion and seconded, so we probably need to call the question.
On discussion, I guess the discussion part of this is that, Ron, I don't like to see penciled in numbers.
Well, it's gonna require, I have to, well, like I mentioned earlier this year, I need some help. I haven't got any help. I've been pulled
Okay.
off in other areas.
Yeah.
So in order to change the programming or do a new complete, financial, it's gonna take time.
All right. Harry, how do you vote? To table the,
On table, yes, I'll vote yes.
Terry?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Bob?
Yeah.
Okay. Chair votes yes. Table.
Operation.
All right, operational report?
We don't have one. Second meeting.
Okay.
We did have a water break up on Red Cloud last night, about 8 o'clock. You guys got through with it about 2:30 this morning. It was a lateral that broke right under a gas line, 6-inch hydrant. So that's why it took the extra 2 hours to get it done. We did hire a new gentleman. His name is Nate. I can't remember his last name. But it's Roberts. Robbins. And it was just like Chris, but he looks like he's going to be a good fit with the guys. And he's very ambitious and wants to learn. And
Good.
we've been
Good.
I just have a quick comment to back up Neil on the financials. We can pay Casell, I don't know how much it is, but they can go back and they can insert certain GLs, because these reports are hard coded. And so we'd have to pay someone from there to go in and change the hard coding to get them the way that we want. or we can wait and, see if I have time to get it done, change the pencil and numbers.
Okay, that's, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
I'd like to address what the manager was talking about. We were talking about the breaks and other stuff. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you post on Facebook about those breaks. Fine to notify people, but in my opinion, you're promoting or saying that these 4 guys, and you're naming names, are doing such a great job. When I got a guy over here, and the ladies over here, they're doing just as good a job. So we need to stop promoting the same 2 or 3 on social media when the entire crew does a hell of a good job. So, in my opinion, please stop promoting just 2 or 3 of them when the entire crew is doing a hell of a job.
Okay. That's done. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna read this, behavior self-statement. In order for the business of the board to be conducted in the most effective and expeditious manner, it is necessary that all persons present maintain a demeanor of civility toward the board, staff, and each other. Conduct that appears threatening or aggressive will not be tolerated. Shouting, speaking out of order, or use of offensive gestures similarly are not acceptable. Such behavior shall constitute the forfeiture of your right to remain in attendance and may, as a point of order brought to the board's attention by council or any board member, including the chairperson, result in your being asked to leave the meeting by the chairperson, or, upon your refusal, being escorted out of the meeting by the proper authority. Do we have any citizens input?
There's a Dennis Cars.
That would be me. Hell, I'm the only one left.
Well, you don't get cookies either, Dennis.
Okay. Maybe you can't do anything about it, but, and maybe I'm the only one in the whole community that thinks it's horrible. But is there something that you guys could do about the postal service or lack of service for the post office?
Postal, okay,
I mean, they've got better hours than the bankers. You know, it's not open hardly at all, really. Thank God I'm retired. Otherwise, you know, if I worked in town, you'd have to, get your mail on Saturdays? Is that about the only time you'd be able to get it? I've called into the main post office. I've filled out blank forms. Called into the main post office trying to get a hold of the postmaster, and they're supposed to get back to me this week because this gal over here that's got the contract told me that she was told by the postmaster that's in charge of the area not to have it open 24 hours a day. So I'm trying to verify that if they actually did say that. But is there anything that this board can do to?
In a short answer to that, no.
Okay.
We have no authority over that post office. It is a contract post office.
Yeah, I understand that, unfortunately.
Go ahead.
So, I agree with you 1,000%, okay? My wife has made numerous phone calls because my wife can get, when she's set to it, okay? Call your congressman, Ms. Bowert, please. I got her telephone number if you need it. All you gotta do is look up her office number. It is a federally controlled entity, okay? She is our local rep. They have reached out to the postmaster because my wife has been getting emails back and forth. But every single person that calls them and complains, that issue is going to get moved more up her agenda. You know, if she's got 500 emails complaining about a post office here, then she's more likely to take more.
Who is it?
Time. It's Lauren Bowler.
Oh, okay.
Is our representative.
Okay.
Okay.
I will do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, it's in Pueblo, it's not in Colorado City,
What?
the post office.
This one?
Yeah, it's actually outside.
Yeah, I know.
On top of that, and this is why I wanted to address it while you're there, Jim had brought a proposal to this board from, I think, the post office wanting to put in cluster boxes. Now, that would help drastically, but because of, like Director Collins is pointing out, maybe they need a little push to put in the cluster boxes so that you may have a cluster over in your neighborhood and a cluster in this neighborhood. So you actually have street delivery and pickup. Not door to door, but neighborhood to neighborhood.
Yeah.
So we may want to push them a little bit because the board has agreed to allow them use of green belts to place these clusters upon.
Yeah. Well, when I talked to this gal over there about it, I said, you know, why aren't you open 24 hours a day? And she said that the postmaster told her that she shouldn't be because it would promote people coming in there and stealing stuff and breaking stuff up. And then she pops up and says, well, really, if I had it open 24 hours a day, she says, it would interrupt my, the donut business that she's going to have. She's more worried about that than the post office because she said that it was going to, she wouldn't be able to separate the post office from her donut shop or whatever she's going to have over there, which really hurt me.
So really what it is, it comes down to, it's above our station.
Yeah, okay, well,
That's.
I just.
As a board, CCMB has no control of
Yeah,
that.
well, I'm gonna get a hold of Bobert. I've filled out multiple complaint forms online,
Good.
but I'll go to Bobert
Unless I'm
now.
mistaken, the board voted to allow use of.
Yeah, we did vote to allow
So
it.
you might include that in your arguments. The board has already voted to allow
Yeah.
the post office to use certain,
Okay.
neighborhood green belts.
Okay.
I have talked to the lady since then. I guess the guy that was supposed to be lining all this up, he was either moved out or quit or something.
She probably fired him.
That was higher up. And she was supposed to get this all going again, but I've not heard back from her.
Okay, so that's kind of a future issue.
Squeaky wheel gets the grease, sir.
And
Okay.
from what I gather too is the only way you can have a post office is if you have a incorporated city.
Right.
Okay.
To, and support
All right.
that, it doesn't a contract.
Then my second one, I have two issues. ATVs. I would like the board, if you have the power to do so, and I think you probably do, to allow ATVs to be driven in the community. Okay? There's a whole lot of them being driven all over now. I've got 3 of them. I've got a side-by-side that is equipped with everything legal to make it street legal in the state of Colorado. It's insured, just like my Gold Wing motorcycle and my cars. It's tagged in Arizona to drive on streets, all streets and roads except for interstate highways. I've got a 4x4. It's the same way. It's tagged. It's insured in Arizona, but I can't drive it here. I've got a Rokon, which is a 2-wheel drive motorcycle, motor scooter, ATV. It's insured. It's tagged in Arizona to drive on streets and roads, and it's tagged to drive on their Indian reservations too. Otherwise, they steal your vehicle from you. But I would like the board somehow allow that for us to be able to drive in this community. You could do like a lot of other small communities in Colorado. There's a lot of them that do this. Okay, I mean a lot of them, and you wouldn't be able to authorize people to drive on the state highway here, but to cut across it, you could designate certain spots to cut across the highway, which small communities do it all the time in Colorado. You know, so
Go ahead.
Don't be negative, please.
No. Well, that's a lot. The problem we've got is 90% of our roads, let's put it closer to 98% of our roads aren't our roads, they belong to the county. So
Mhm.
we have no authority over those roads. Now, there's a half a dozen streets within the community that we are the, government entity that, maintains them.
Mhm.
All the others are maintained and technically owned by Pueblo County.
Mhm.
So your argument needs to go to Pueblo County for that. Now, the state road you mentioned is totally different.
Right. Well, I've already contacted the state trying to get them to change it,
Yeah.
statewide, but
Well,
can't you guys as a board go to the county and say, hey,
No.
you know, we're going to allow this within our community, you know, can we include county roads?
Yes, we could make a presence as the board requesting that, just like you could. So we would be an entity requesting the public county to make that rule change, just like you as a private citizen would. We would be acting as a private citizen, and we could do that.
It would be more power coming from you guys, from the board though, than from an individual like me.
That's something that we probably ought to discuss as far as whether we want that to happen or not.
Yeah.
Put that on the next agenda.
That's kind of a study session agenda item.
But I mean, they're being driven all over the place.
Right.
You know, and the only problem I have is minors are, most of them are being driven by minors, and they belong to quote unquote important people here in the community, I guess. More important than me, which I'm not important at all, but they're being driven all over by these kids and adults.
So, I guess, kind of like with the post office, the recommendation I think would be for you to approach Pueblo County. We will discuss it as well as a board and decide whether we also want to make that request from Pueblo
I would.
County.
Okay.
So I would ask that we put that on the next study
Okay.
session,
Okay.
because I'm actually all for it.
Well, I don't want to be the negative on this, but I'm guessing the cities that allow it are cities.
correct.
Yeah, home rule cities.
I think there's, I don't
They're
know.
probably home rule cities.
Plus they're probably licensed.
I
His
think,
are all licensed.
well, his are licensed,
Yeah,
but
but
I'm thinking
licensed,
that
what do you
it's
mean
whatever the sheriff.
Tagged.
No. There's communities here in Colorado that they don't tag them. I mean, all of mine are all tagged
That would have to
for
be
national
required.
forest land too, but they don't have a state tag or a county tag
Right.
or anything like that on them.
That's because the state tag doesn't exist for them.
Yeah, the state doesn't have a tag form.
And
Yeah.
so- and-
I'm trying to get the state to do
But
that.
again, the county or the city, which we're not a city,
Right.
we don't have the authority over the roads.
But the county may have, and I can't say that they do, but the county may have the authority to say, within Colorado City Metro
Right.
District, we will allow them to, operate a four-wheeler on our roads. 'Cause
That's what I'm
like
asking.
Mr. Cook said they are the county roads.
Yes.
But
And
they
it-
have to be with the driver's license too.
It
Well,
would have
yeah.
to be with the driver's
Yeah.
license, yes.
That you can register your ATVs and stuff through Colorado Wildlife.
Right.
Yeah, all of mine are.
Yeah.
I have those tags on all of mine, you know, so I can drive them in national forest land, otherwise it's like a $250 fine. You know, and I've got so
You
many
put that
tags
on-
on my vehicles with my ATVs, it's
Can
not
you put that
funny.
on the study session?
I have a note here for it.
Good. All right. What's your number 3?
No, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Thank you, and appreciate.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, appreciate your time.
For the next one, attorney's report, I did put in, an update on our due diligence from, Mr. Marin, as they went through the last hearing with the, objectors. It explains what happened in it and where the ruling went as for the referee. So it's something that, just to keep you guys updated on that.
Agenda items, we have resolution 10-2021, referring to the electors of the district, a ballot issue regarding the district's authority to collect, retain, and spend all revenues notwithstanding constitutional or statutory limits for the November 2021 election.
I make a motion that we, pass resolution 10-2021 for the elections.
I'll second it.
Moving second, discussion?
So I don't see in here where this is talking about 2020.
Yes, if you look back into the
The
ballot
resolution
question,
itself.
it's not in the resolution, it will be on the ballot question. It's
Okay.
on the back side.
Okay.
Yeah. So, concept.
Yes, this all sources in physical year 2020 and thereafter.
Okay. Okay.
It moved.
Mr. Chairman, I
As a,
have-
so we're in discussion now.
Just making
Go
sure.
ahead.
Again, I'm going to recommend we do not do this, and I'm going to reserve my right to, promote the no within the community.
Okay, any other discussion? My discussion. You can, as a private citizen, you can reserve the right to promote the no in the city, but not as a board member.
My vote will stand for that.
I call the question.
Harry, how do you vote?
Yes.
Terry?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Bob?
No.
Chair votes yes. Motion passes.
Okay, next agenda item, Greenhorn Mountain Campground to Enterprise.
I guess before we back up to it, I need to record this.
Yeah, we did. Correct.
This is, nobody abstained.
Oh. No. Yes, Harry. Yes, Mr. Kraus. Yes, Mr. Collin. No, Mr. Cook. Chair said yes.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Ellis.
Yes, Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Ellis.
Okay, I'll let them go. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, next on agenda items is Greenhorn Mountain Campground to Enterprise. Like I said,
I make a motion at this time that we put the Greenhorn Mountain Campground in Enterprise.
I'll second.
Discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see that resolution. I can't find it in my document.
it hasn't been, we didn't set up a resolution for it yet.
I'd like to amend Mr. Collins' motion to, backdate this to 2020. If possible, need the verbiage in there that if possible.
I'll accept that amendment.
Now, this motion is to establish a date for a public hearing?
No,
No,
this
no,
is
no. This is
to
to put it in
establish
the
a
campground.
resolution to make Greenhorn Mountain Campground into an enterprise.
Don't we have to establish a public hearing?
No,
We
we
just-
have to
we
have
already
a public
did.
hearing.
We just did, I messed up on the earlier part trying to make a motion at that time.
Yeah, that was
That
the end
was
of
a
the
public hearing then.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, we-
Mr. Chairman, I have
Yeah.
some,
Go ahead.
discussion on this. So, even though I made the motion, does not necessarily mean I'm gonna vote for it. I would like to ask Josh, real quick. I feel like you've got a lot of concerns about this. And I'm not entirely certain. I mean, I feel like the auditor and I feel like the lawyer answered all of my questions. Okay, but I would like to know if I'm correct here, your concern is that it's going to take from the rest of Parks and Rec if we put this into an enterprise, correct?
Yes.
Or are you worried about additional paperwork?
No. No, not worried about it.
You're worried about it's going to take from Parks and Recs. Now, from what the auditor told us tonight and from what the lawyer told us tonight, what makes you feel that way?
Because do we even know how to budget that for the first year? How much, where the money goes? Are we gonna lose any money from tax dollars, property tax dollars, by taking it out of the general fund into an enterprise? He couldn't answer that question yet.
So, if you look at the financials for this year, the budget for just the campground is $62,500.
Okay.
If we're looking at.
That's not just the campground. That's the campground, the pavilion, anything going on. Anybody
Oh,
with
plus
rights?
the pavilion?
Yeah.
Okay. So more like,
That campground is huge chunk of it.
but if you're looking at expenses, there's like wages, payroll taxes, health insurance, workman's comp, insurance, fuel costs. Those are just some of the expenses that will be coming out of that revenue.
So do we have, the golf course I've got a little bit more handle on. Do we know whether or not, because we gotta break his wages out, we gotta break everybody's wages out, according to that one and according to the government side. We've gotta break out the fuel and the vehicle, according to Parks and Rec and according to the government side. Because I think you're aware of this, both sides will be paying for everything. The campground will be paying for wages and fuel and vehicle that's used at the campgrounds. The government side will be paying for wages, fuel, and the vehicle that's used on their side, correct? Do we have any idea if the campground is making a profit after we take those out?
I'm not
Also,
sure.
is the water department gonna be responsible for the roads through there? To plow and to, service and bring gravel in? Or is that gonna be paid out separate in lifetime, or how are you gonna work that?
An enterprise has to pay for all of its, stuff.
They take the
Out of
utility
pocket.
department and comes in and helps.
Those wages, the
Like we're doing
wages
now, yes.
would have to come out of,
Okay, this as long as it's.
yeah, the
separate.
wages would have to come out of the campground whenever somebody comes in, correct?
It's not broken out. Okay, what, yes. Did you get your question answered?
Yeah, I think I did. Go ahead, Bob.
I'd like to address a couple of these points. As for the roads, it's already calculated in the budget. Within, the campgrounds have to pay for their own roads. They have to pay for their own wages now. All of the wages and everything's allocated at this point. For instance, if he works in the swimming pool, we allocate at the pool, or the campgrounds, there's allocations back and forth. If you work in the sewer department or the water department, the hours there are allocated to each department.
Okay.
So the allocation for wages won't change.
It's already done.
It's already done. The roads is not gonna change. The campgrounds paid for gravel a couple of months ago. Came out of, campground money. So it's all accounted for at this point. To wait to account for something is crazy because we already account for everything. Now, I would like to make an amendment, offer a motion to amend the original motion to include the pavilions with the campground because that's part of the money-making scheme.
I'll allow that. I'll accept that.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'd like to ask for a reading of the motion.
Your motion was to take the campground to enterprise.
Yeah, put the campgrounds and the pavilions into enterprise
In 2020.
in
Or
2020.
backdated to 2020
If
if
allowable.
possible.
If possible.
And, I've got a second on that.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
My biggest concern is I 100% believe that Parks and Rec is underfunded. There are so many more things in my mind that I want to do and I think we need to do for the community, whether it's more youth sports, adult sports, activities, anything to give people something to do. When I started, the campground was the easiest place to bring in more revenue. And if we separate that and take it out, like right now I'm dealing with a problem at the park. The sewage ejector pump quit working. Trying to get somebody to come look at it. If we have a big expense in March on the Parks and Rec side, and we can't transfer money until the end of the year, how does the campground help with that?
Mr. Chairman, may I speak on this? Quickly, Bob.
Unless I'm mistaken, Gilvan, you currently use the funds in the different departments, such as golf course or water and sewer and stuff, as a float across departments because you're making the accounting at the end of the year. That would not change his access to funds if it's in enterprise. Is that right or wrong?
It would at the very beginning.
I mean, we're doing that right now. We're using government funds to fund water sewer enterprises, especially with our loan being due
Correct.
in February. So we're already doing that. Whether we should be doing that,
Well,
That's a
no,
different
actually,
question.
we're not,
Didn't
because
have that.
you're setting the funds aside to pay them loans off the year before. So you aren't using funds from general fund. You're using it from the water fund that is put into a separate account.
it's just showing in our financials, like we're getting, accumulating funds in 2021 to pay the 2022 payment, but it's not going to show in our financials that payment until 2022.
Right.
But you're right in that sense that we are accumulating funds, but I mean, it's only like 16,000 per month, so.
And I think
I don't think we want to get too far off this.
Okay, Josh?
I think Yvonne will agree that it's been nice having the campground bringing in more money because when is it, March, into March, when property taxes start coming in?
Mhm.
So now Parks and Rec actually has a cash flow at the beginning of the year.
But see, there again, we're floating money across lines.
And that shouldn't change, should it?
Yeah.
That won't change.
Not really agreed with it.
I don't see how we could operate without doing that.
Yeah, I don't think it would change if we put it in enterprise. We do it already.
Actually, you'd be building a bank in the campground to help
Because-
wherever you want. It'd be just
Because
hard.
the profit that you make right now in the campgrounds that is coming from outside the community, if you make too much, we gotta pay it back.
Yeah.
This will exempt that from happening.
But so would you.
I would be on board with,
Well, so will DeBrucy, but this covers both. Like I said, I don't like all my eggs in one basket.
I would be on board with a motion that if the DeBrucing didn't pass, so make it enterprise.
We can't wait that long though. If we're gonna take it back to 2020, we gotta do it now.
Mr. Chairman, I call the question.
Because I would agree with you if we could wait.
Mr. Cook, how do you vote?
Start with me then.
I have started.
Yes.
Response?
Yes?
Mr. Kraus?
No.
Tom Stetler?
No.
Oh.
Thank you, guys.
That one backfired.
That didn't work. Chair votes no. Mr. Chairman,
the question was called, but that doesn't mean that we can't look at it again. I still feel like I'm out in the twilight zone, even understanding all the differences between an enterprise zone and a government. And I'm basing a lot of my no vote on my respect for the job that Josh has done. And that doesn't mean that initial information can't be, I know how passionate you are about it. Can't
I
be
just,
presented.
look, we lost, I agree, but I think Josh is making a huge mistake because he's not going to have that money that he could have at the end of the year.
Well, and that's what I'm saying, we can continue to look at the possibility, because the timeliness was only on the debrucing, correct?
Yeah. And if it debruces, this is all mute. Okay,
And also,
but if it
we want to
doesn't,
do another
this
30
isn't.
days.
But if we can backdate right now to 2020, why
We
can't?
can't do it after the audit's complete.
Right.
And the audit's gonna be complete here in about 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and we're done.
So that puts pressure on us, for me, puts the pressure on us to debruce.
That's if we can do it.
If we do debruce.
Yeah.
If we don't debruce, guys, we're writing a $260,000 check.
Anyway,
It's gonna impact our budget.
Huge. So
70%.
we can put all of our eggs in that basket if everybody wants to. But if we don't debruce, if the voters say, nope, have a nice life, we're gonna come up with 260 grand.
Mr.
And,
Chairman?
sorry,
Point of order, we're having discussion without a motion on the floor. Mr. Chairman, at this point, I would make a motion to put the, parking enterprise. Now we can continue with the discussion if you give a second.
is there more discussion? I don't think we need to. Let's withdraw the motion. We've already been through this discussion and vote.
The thing about it is
Jim, we don't have.
I know, but I just got one clarification on what Mr. Collins said. It's if the lawyer comes back and says we can do it.
if they come back and say we can do it,
We're done.
I mean, if they say we can't do it, then,
We're still done.
yeah, we're still done. But if they say, they come back and we say we can do it,
To Bob's point, we're discussing this
yeah,
without a motion.
yeah, so.
So my question to everybody, is there more discussion? Do we need to bring this back up?
I can add to, you don't have to go back to the public hearing and all of that. If you brought it back up with a change in the motion brought on by somebody else, it can be brought back up.
But we need a motion to continue it.
Right. But I don't think that do we have more discussion is my question. So.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table this, agenda item to the next meeting. Will that help?
No.
Okay.
Actually, that would.
So you have to withdraw your motion, or we have to go up?
Well, my motion was, you haven't even asked for a second on the
No,
motion,
right.
we just jumped directly to,
Yeah,
discussion.
So.
I'll second his motion to table. So we can go into discussion.
Mr. Chairman, you're two motions behind.
We have the motion on the floor is to bring this back up so we can discuss it, not to table.
Yeah.
Okay, is that what you're saying?
I will second.
Okay. Is there more discussion on this motion?
So, yes, if I may. Because I really, everybody needs to understand that you guys are gonna hate life if we gotta write that $260,000 check.
I agree.
Okay? Everybody's gonna hate life. I mean, it's gonna really hurt, guys. So, we better not put all of our eggs in one basket, is all I'm saying.
So
what if we put it into sorry Terry, go ahead. If we put it into an enterprise and then the debrucing passes, then what?
We can always take it out.
It can go in and out as necessary.
We just take it out. We can take the golf course out if we decide we want to take it
Mr.
out.
Cross, did you have a-
No, that was my question. What do we need to do to make it?
Well, Karen and the auditor both told us here that there is no limits to putting it in or taking it out.
I understand that.
There's gonna be a fee to set up that enterprise.
There's gonna be fees to set it up.
If you set it up.
The auditor said that we have to have that part taken care of before he completes the audit.
Yes.
Which is 2020, whatever year.
Mhm.
And Carolyn was gonna get back to us tomorrow.
Yes, and if I do get her, I can set up a special meeting to.
We're gonna need a special meeting to
Go
try
forward.
to decide whether or not we wanna put the golf course in enterprise.
Yeah,
But,
and I'll check the date on that for the public hearing.
but if this doesn't work, okay, if it ends up being a disaster, we just take it out. That's what they did with the golf course when the golf course was losing money. They took it out, put it in government, cause it was enterprise forever.
So, the motion still is on the floor.
To table it.
No, we're on the discussion side.
We're on discussion of actually taking it to an enterprise. So it's a revote, that's where we're at. We need to vote on this motion to take the.
Reconsider. I
To
make
take
a
the
motion to
Greenhorn
reconsider.
Mountain Campground to enterprise.
I thought the motion was to table.
No,
And he
that-
seconded
that was
to
after.
table it, to have the discussion.
That was a motion to reconsider first. We haven't got to the second
Right, we've
motion.
got a motion to reconsider, to actually.
Well, I thought he seconded, I thought he only seconded the other one, not the first one.
He did, he
Because I thought the first one.
I don't know
was
which
not
one I seconded, so it
The
doesn't really
first one
matter.
wasn't seconded. It was-
Mr. Chairman, I call to clear the table and start new. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to reconsider placing the campground in enterprise.
For 2020
For
and
20.
beyond.
We'll clarify that in a moment.
Okay. I'll second.
So now the table is clear. There's no extra motions floating.
Right. In discussion, discussion.
So, I will say this, the campground is not the important one. Okay, the campground is probably, it did make us money. But the campground's not the big elephant in the room. The campground's gonna maybe save us, I don't even think the auditor had the numbers. So it's probably, I'm certain it's not gonna save us a ton. It'll probably save us some. But the big elephant in the room is when we get to the golf course. Okay, that's half the 270 grand, right there.
Mr. Hofstadter?
If we do this, we'll still put the tabor on, we still have to vote for that. I mean, that the tabor thing has to be on the ballot.
Yeah.
It's already been approved, it's
I mean, we're
going.
gonna have to push that thing hard. It does, I mean, it doesn't benefit us to do anything if we can't go back to 2020, in my opinion, for the. But I think, instead of putting our eggs in one basket, I'm listening to Josh, I'm listening to lots of things, I'm thinking, we can't afford to lose $270,000 or pay it back.
I agree. It's gone if we don't do something.
Yeah, so I think, at least we made the motion, we'd have it in place, or work on things to qualify it for, if it even qualifies. But at least have it in.
Well-
In motion to do something.
So, let's hold that. Jim?
You know, on the lines that we were going, I think we need more information at this point, in that if we can do it, whether the lawyer says it is she says it's a possibility, but she is not sure. I think at this point to say, yeah, let's do it, I would like to have that opinion as saying that we can backdate it for 2020.
That's part of the motion, will be part of the motion to backdate.
Yes.
Yeah, if it doesn't backdate, then the motion isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
Okay, now is that how the motion is?
We're going to go through that in just a second.
Yeah, we'll get that. I will clarify, yes.
Mr. Chairman, I call for a reading of the motion.
the motion on the floor is to reconsider making the Greenhorn Mountain Campground to enterprise.
Correct. And we've already seconded and had discussion.
Now we need to vote on that motion.
Yes. We've already done it.
Simply
So voted.
simply to reconsider.
This is just reconsidering. We'll
Yeah.
get to the other in a moment.
Yeah, yeah, this is just to reconsider it, not to pass it or put it in enterprise.
Mr. Officer, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Sure, I'd love to stay longer.
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Cook?
Yes.
Chair votes no.
Just because he wants to.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to place the campground and pavilions backdated to 2020 into enterprise, with the ability to withdraw if we can't meet the 2020.
And I will second that one.
Moved and second, any discussion on that one?
Call the question.
How do you vote? Mr. Officer?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
No. Go ahead.
I'll vote no.
We sealed it.
It's passed.
That was just wrong, Bob.
Well, I see how it was going.
Okay, so if, just to be clear, that if it can be backdated to 2020, then we will do it. If not, we won't.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly what.
And, to be clear, if we decide again next year we wanna go back to enterprise,
Or put it in this
then we can do it again.
Put it in this
Share
year.
it again. So, okay.
Later on this year, we can take it out of enterprise for
So that
2020.
depends on the report from Carolyn, basically.
Yes. Do we have a point where I can ask a question?
Yes.
How does the pavilion being added into that, does that affect the park at all?
Income.
Just income.
Well,
Does that affect any grants that we can get for the park down there, whether it be playground or anything, because it's on the same property, all in the same park?
No, it's
Part
just
of
to pavilion,
Just
And we-
for
the
the,
revenue source.
we have to move the fixed assets out of government into the enterprise.
yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, it's not,
Now, when I said
Gone now.
pavilions with an S, I know we have something over by the lake and the little roundy round thing in the campgrounds. That's why I included the S to cover all of them to have a roof.
Okay, let's move on.
Thank you.
Okay, old business, like I said, I still got those on my plate, we're working on them, we're getting there, it's just trying to get everything else straightened out. Doing well, I put in the contract, Carolyn sent that to me yesterday morning, that's why it was not put in on Friday. I have not signed it. I am still trying to find money for it. We did put into the ARP funds to see if they would put it in. I got the notification back that they did receive it and they're evaluating it. At this point, looking at what the where we're at, and with our bond money that we have left for the sewer plant, to take it out of it, we'd have to go to the bond council to check. Carolyn, I asked her about that. She did say that she doesn't know whether they would worry about it or not, because we had projects, the 900,000 was for projects, which I kind of laid it out when we did do the bond, in that saying that it was going to be 75% water and 25% going to sewer, which we haven't done any of our sewer side yet. We bought a trailer, that's about it. We've been trying to find somebody, which Neil and I talked to a gentleman today about trying to get our third digester up. Who could we contact that does this? Because at this point
we need some help with that. I have a couple of engineering firms that will see if we can get some pricing to see what it would take to get it up and running to make the third digester. We also have VFDs that we're at that point now. I believe Jensen said we're at the point now that we need 6 of them, wasn't it?
I believe so.
Okay.
If you put that digester on, yes. If you put that other digester on, yes.
Yes, that we're gonna need 6. It would save us electricity wise if we do, because by doing the VFDs, it will cause the plant to run on more efficiency in what it senses and not on time, because right now we're on time. I'm just waiting for the quote back for him. He said it was going to be double of what the one I gave you earlier, because I only had 3 on it. So you're looking at about $60,000, but I want to get a quote from him, Brandon, so I can bring it to the board on that.
So back to the dual well.
The dual well, like I said, I'm just at that point where I need to find funds for it, because
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak.
Go ahead, Ken.
I'm good.
Go ahead.
This board has already discussed it. This board decided to pull the funds from the loan because it covered projects. This was done a year ago. And we're still waiting for the contract that was approved, and we also granted the manager to sign the contract as soon as it became available.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when we set up this bond, all the accounting calculations are based on 85-15, so 85% water, 15% sewer. So all the calculations that we have done expense-wise, revenue, putting the proceeds in the financials, and the calculations that Sam and his team have done are based on that. So I think we should probably ask Sam if that's going to be an issue. And then the second thing is the recommendation by Sam, and I know you're wanting to use the proceeds of a loan that are allocated for sewer, is that whether, no? Okay.
I'm not asking for proceeds allocated to sewer. This is water. Always been water.
Anyway, the recommendation from Sam was if we do use the proceeds from the loan, that we should probably go through the bond council to say whether it's a capital project or whether it's a repair.
So
The other aspect that we were looking at too is out of our depreciation, because when we did depreciation last year on our budget, we set aside, I think it was $320,000, which was part of operations. We took a lot of the operation money out because we figured that it was going to go into capital improvements as infrastructure or whatever. So that's one possibility, that to take it out of there. I have no problem with that if you want to go that way.
But
as for coming out of the bond, I wouldn't recommend it.
So we are, fortunately, we have a full lake. We don't need to do a well right now. Is it wise for us to put this off for a while until we do?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. You gotta increase our water.
Well, when I say put it off, I'm only talking.
Well,
how soon are we gonna get our?
I've been working for this city.
That, after talking to them today, they said that they would be having decisions within the next 1 to 2 weeks.
Mr. Chairman, I reiterate, the board has already approved funding. If the board would like to reallocate other funds other than the bond money, then the board is more than welcome, any member, to make a motion to allocate other funds. But we've already approved the contract, instructed it be signed, and approved the funding.
That is correct.
Mr. Chairman, if I may. So the only thing is though, to keep the board out of trouble, okay, is that if we went over the 85%, which have we went over the 85% for water?
Yes, we've come on like 50,000 over.
Okay, so to keep the board out of trouble, I would highly recommend that if we are going to continue with this project, actually, I can make the motion right now, that we allocate, I'll make a motion that we allocate funds from our depreciation account,
I would leave it.
or just
the way-
other funds.
Other funds. That way, if we do get ARP funds, we can use them.
Okay, so I make a motion at this time that we allocate other funds to do this dual.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to amend that to say that we use the funds appropriated and other funds as necessary.
I'll take that.
We'll accept that.
Yes.
Okay.
You got a
Question,
second?
what do you mean allocated? What do you mean allocated funds?
We already approved using funds from the bond money.
That's not the question.
It was already approved.
We did approve it.
Yeah, we did already approve it. But now we're
So now we're trying to shift from those funds to something else, which is fine. Just as long as we complete, we've already instructed, do it.
We could, so that way we could, well, we need a second. Do we have a second?
So what's the motion? I'll second it.
Okay. So now we have the discussion. So what that really means is that we're not restricted to using just the bond money.
Yeah.
Other one we're gonna do first though.
yes.
Yes.
Well, yes.
Correct?
Which we could use depreciation, or we
Whatever
can
you
use
need.
grant money, whatever we need to.
Yes, we can take it from whatever pile we need.
We're basically taking off the restrictions to use the bond money.
Yeah, okay. So read the motion again. Did I second it?
The motion,
Did I second?
the motion is to,
You call for the reading.
The motion is to, what did you add there, Bob? You're killing me.
Motion is to, continue with the, funding of the project using the bond funds and other available, or other available funds.
Yeah, and or,
Funds.
that's.
And or other available funds.
There you go.
There we go.
is that correct, Christie?
Yes.
Okay.
I call the question.
All right, let's go ahead and vote.
Yeah.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus? Yes. Mr. Hochstetter?
Yes.
Chair votes yes.
How does that affect the campground?
That don't affect the campgrounds at all.
I got playground. Playground up in Applewood, it kind of came to a standstill. I finally got to talk to Robert today from Stars and Bars. He had a couple of packets of bolts and stuff that you don't know what happened, whether they were there when he started or somebody stole them or whatever, but he's getting the company to send in the packets that he needs, because they're special grade A bolts or whatever that they need to use on it. And he said that they would be finishing it as soon as he gets that brought in to finish it up. I told him to leave the banister down, because what we'll end up doing is putting down gravel. We have to put down so much gravel underneath it, and then put the felt, and then we'll put the border around to hold the felt down, and then when we get our mesh or whatever, we can put on top of it. We're still looking at that as to pricing and where we can get it at the best price. I have a couple leads that we're still looking at. I gotta call them back though for bulk. That's all I have.
Let's, in the interest of time, let's move on. Old business?
That's
Anything
all
else?
of them do in the business.
New business?
Yeah, we're still on old business here.
Yeah. You have anything?
Well, there's a whole list right here.
All security cameras, all that
I
stuff.
told you we're still working on that, to get it it's just trying to get it done.
Without the switches, I've never received a call.
We haven't got back to Jason yet on it. He was on vacation and we've been busy trying to get everything else done.
And a covenants lawyer?
Governance lawyer, they talked to Carolyn on it, whether they have one in there that would be suitable. She's still doing some research on that.
Yeah, she's been doing that forever. And she's already said that the other lawyer is a homeowners association lawyer, not a restricted covenant lawyer.
So then we got.
We are
I'll go back
different
to
covenants.
I'll have to go back to the ones that I found in Springs and go from there.
Anybody else have any new business? Go ahead.
I do have old business. What's the status on bringing the swing sets online?
I haven't had time to work on here lately.
I'd like to address that a second. I know I proved when we did those, I found out more information after the fact that I think you have to bring them back up to OSHA standards. Because back in the days when you and I had swings and teeter-totters and merry-go-rounds and stuff, they've taken out a few of that stuff because of safety. Some of these aren't safe to put up a swing on them, but if you did that, then you'd have to put the ground stuff underneath them and everything else to meet OSHA standards. And I think we have other things right now than if we do the other playgrounds we have. I think I misquoted on that one, but I'm sorry.
Are we putting swing sets in the new playground?
Yes.
Thank
But
you.
they're part of the
They're part of that
They're
gym,
part of
part of
that.
the gym thing, yeah.
playground.
So, I've got a question for the chairman. Would you like me to bring up the CCAAC emergency under old business or new?
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, you have a category, number 16. You can add it to it.
So, is that it for old business? New business?
So, well, I guess we could add it to 16. Yeah. Never mind. I don't have any business.
No new business? Let's move on to the CCAAC then. We had the discussion earlier about the emergency natures, those issues. Now we thought at this point we can discuss that.
I'll make a motion at this time that we place the enforcement section of CCAAC, suspend the enforcement section of CCAAC until personnel and current events allow us to retake it, or to retake it up.
I second that motion.
Discussion.
Sure. You plan on this being indefinite, you left it open-ended. So the way it's worded, it's totally indefinite. You want to do away with covenants. You want to enforce something that is covenants. Our lawyer is full of it. If she wants to pick one sentence out of an entire document and say otherwise. And then on top of that, you've got numerous letters in the loop that are already out. Do you propose to cancel all letters and action that has begun?
I can respond to that. If you notice, we hired Chris to come in and help with things to catch up with a lot of stuff. And then we had a
person resign and go work at the bank. So now Chrissy's over working in the office. We have no one, when you look at the monster that we developed, when we set up the CCAC, we had four people, okay? And we had a kind of thing where you could do these things, go out and do things, see things, and then you have to have a letter. It's a time element thing. You have to send out a letter, so somebody has to type it up, send it out. We have no manpower right now in this office or anywhere else to follow through, to do the thing like it's supposed to be done in a timely manner. And we have, if you look at things, they weren't done in a timely manner because we have no manpower in this office to do it because we've had issues with water and sewer and we got through it. So I think suspending it right now would be the best thing until we have the manpower in the office and out there as volunteers. I'm done.
Are you done? May I? So, I did leave it open-ended, but any board member during any meeting can bring up a resolution to bring it back. Nobody's stopping anybody from bringing that up during any meeting. This could last 2 weeks, it could last 3 months. It really depends on how quickly we can get the staffing back up and how quickly we can get volunteers out of the community to handle some of this, stuff. Thank you.
So, if we were to do that, the complaints that come in now, we would have to refer them to Pueblo County.
That would be the only option they would have. Refer them to Pueblo County, or they can, property owners are capable of enforcing covenants themselves. There is that is more than, it is authorized. Let me put it that way. It is authorized for you can enforce a covenant against me. Anybody that lives in Colorado City can enforce a covenant against their neighbor. It's perfectly legal to do so.
Also,
Through the small claims court. You go down, file an action through small claims court, and the judge will enforce the covenant or not.
There are no judges in small claims court.
Whatever they call it. But small claims court, you know what I'm talking about, you just try to be opposite.
Mediator,
Yes,
go into mediation.
yes.
Mr. Chairman, so
I'm opposed to put it on hiatus, and I understand the rationale for it. But I think the reality of it is it would kill it. And I think we worked pretty hard, regardless of doubters to that, to get it going. I would suggest instead that we try to use some common sense. We have made, as near as I know, I'll speak for myself, I have made no efforts to replenish or encourage or find more volunteers to make it possible to reach out. I do not believe that the definition of fairness in this means that we have to deal with everything chronologically. I will never believe that for a moment. Trials are set by criteria of severity. I believe it's much more important to our community to grow, but I also believe that there has to be some action taken on the most egregious things that are happening out there, and unless we want to do it, although I don't read social media, so I don't know, but maybe Bob could donate half of his social media time to checking out complaints, just a thought, because I think that's an important part of it too. I don't think if we vote to put it on a hiatus that it'll ever come back. It's too negative, it's got too much emotion wrapped up in it to the point of stupidity. But I do think that we need to prioritize and use common sense, and we can't put it on hiatus. In my opinion, it'll kill it. We can say, okay, I don't want the district manager spending time on it when we're trying to land $10 million worth of grants, or we're trying to replenish our staff, or we're trying to do this or that. I think as you look at our responsibilities, it's not a grade A responsibility, but it is a responsibility.
So,
who,
I'd like to amend my motion, or my
Before you do.
motion, my motion, please. I'd like to amend my motion. The amendment to my motion would be, directing the city manager to spend time on covenants when he has personnel and time to do so.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak.
Would you second that?
That's an open, I mean, you don't know when you're gonna have the personnel to do it.
I know, well, but he's saying though that it's not a priority, but the thing is, we're gonna have a director, okay, that's going to be pounding him every meeting because he supposedly isn't doing his job.
That's pretty fuzzy.
Well, it's gonna happen. I mean, it's gonna happen.
Do you accept that amendment?
No, I guess I do, yeah.
Okay, back to discussion. Mr. Cook?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me point out that the board has a responsibility to enforce covenants. It doesn't say this covenant or that covenant. The board spent $20,000 approximately to set themselves up as the board, because they did not want to appoint a committee. Matter of fact, the previous administration did not appoint. So this board did go out of its way to set itself up and do that. When it set itself up, the manager was not part of it. This board decided in its wisdom, oh, well, let's let the manager handle it. I offered at the last meeting, cut the manager out. I've also offered many times, hey, if you need something looked at, give me a call. While I'm out driving, I'll swing by. Not one single call has ever been made. So, it's a lack of action on the board to move forward because certain board members do not want to enforce covenants. Now, the covenants on the books. Pueblo County Sheriff can't enforce a single covenant. So calling them does nothing for trash cans. Matter of fact, calling them for cars on the street does nothing. They've gone out of their way after a previous board member or two got together, said, let's talk to the sheriff. They did nothing. It's time the board takes responsibility. If that means board members need to go look, then let's go look. You had people that had quit being on the architectural review committee because, in their opinion, the manager wanted to do it. Now you're worried because the manager's doing it. We have to cut the manager out. We'll make a motion again later to remove the manager from any part of the covenants. Thank you for letting me speak.
But the issue is, we don't have the manpower to follow the rules once it's done. I mean, and you can't, I mean, who's gonna do it?
Let's get back on.
We are.
Excuse me, sir, I think.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's get back on focus. I think that Terry's comment, and that's what you responded to. So my question then is, I agree with you that the manager has other obligations. Let's say that we shift the two board members, or the board members are looking for volunteers, or even let's say we find volunteers. Who's going to do the paperwork? Is that going to be Christie? She's already loaded up. Who's gonna do the paperwork to send out the letters and to go through this, to create this process? Are we going to delegate that to the volunteers and expect them to do it? Who are we going? So it still comes down to kind of to a manpower thing. I agree with you that I'm against this. I think you're right, that if we actually put a moratorium on government complaints, that it'll kill it. I agree there. So I'm not in favor of that. But I'm concerned about the manpower issue as to who's going to handle stuff. Harry could come in. We could actually have Harry come in and do all of this work, except we better not ask him, because he probably won't. So that's what.
What would either one of you guys, what would your solution be? Because we gotta come up with a solution.
I think that we as board members have to get more involved.
So.
We have to ask Bob to go out and check this out. I think that if there's a complaint that comes in, first he logs it and sends it to one of us.
But then you have the steps that we have there, and that's the part that's not happening.
And that might be what we have to do.
Because we have no manpower to get the letters typed up and follow through with it.
It's a form letter off the computer and put in the address.
Something, well.
You gotta look up the address.
You gotta look at
the location and the lots.
So, is there any reason we can't do it?
Mr. Chairman, may I speak just a moment without interrupting your question and allow you to get back to your question?
That question, that's.
Okay, but I want to speak and then allow answers to your question.
Now, all of us, I guess, just a second, all of us, in the matter of interest of time, we've got to get this done. It's getting late. We have to get this meeting done.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I know there's a second room over there. I don't know what's in it. I don't care at this moment. Is there any place within this building the Architectural Control Committee or Review Committee or committee could have a desk and a computer and work in that way, whether it be Bob or Harry or Greg or Neil? You come in, there's things that need to be looked at. We are the board. We accepted the responsibility. Now, if we have volunteers to help, more power to them. Bring them in, let them work on it. But if they don't do it, they're just volunteers. We can't demand of them. We chose as a board to become it. So, if we had a place to come in, and there again, and I'll bring the motion up later, leave the manager out of it. Let him do his thing. If a call comes in, refer it to a board member.
So, if we were to do that, would each one of us be willing to dedicate an hour a week?
I could dedicate an hour a week.
You might have to throw me out.
So, because I think it would need to be across all of us.
So would it, speaking for myself, it would work better for me to have to do 5 hours every 5th week
Well,
than drive down here for an hour.
Well, the other thing is too, is that we could probably do it from our houses.
yes.
I don't think.
The majority of it will be online. It's just that the manual papers would be in the office, and he could say, could you scan that and send it to me, or do we have that?
Well,
But once again, somebody here in the office has to be responsible for taking the complaints.
Why?
No,
How do they get to us?
no.
Well, Christie takes the
She
complaint on the
takes the
phone.
complaint already.
Yeah.
That's it. It stops right there.
And
She puts it on the log is handed to the proper office. You yourself brought up chain of command. She's
So-
doing nothing but taking that complaint.
Taking the complaint, going and putting it on a log
Yes,
in the office
or in the computer.
or in the computer.
That's it.
Yeah, but that's gonna be more.
She's already doing that.
Are you already putting it in the computer? So it wouldn't take any more time then for you to log the complaints and email it out to a board member?
Why does she have to email it
Yeah,
out?
would you-
If it's your week and you
Yes,
have
sir.
2 hours, you go in whenever you want and say, okay.
Come in and do it.
Yeah,
we
you
could.
could come in and work on it.
Doesn't have to be.
Well, I was thinking more like you, cause, you know,
But
Well,
you could
in a
call,
case like
you could
here.
call and ask, is there stuff to look at?
And-
Let me come down there.
And, what he could do is he could ask one of us to go send him his paperwork.
Yeah, Neil, could you?
Yeah, I call Neil all the time.
Mr. Ellis?
He's at my beck and call.
I'm never gonna live.
oh, God, have mercy.
Well, Bob, if we leave Jim out of it, then you have to promise not to come down on him
I
every
can't
meeting.
come
So-
down on him if he's not part of it.
Well, I don't think you should be doing it now, but you do.
He is part of it. He is the source. You placed him at the head. I have, as Mr. Collins said, chain of command.
Yeah, let's move on.
So I will withdraw my motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
I bet you did it right. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that the board itself set up an office and work on the covenant issues themselves as individuals and remove the manager from any covenant work except for him to sign the stop work orders, because it takes a second person there to sign a stop work order. We don't want a board member just running over and say, hey, I'm gonna slap a stop work order on you. Because we've already approved the stop work order for him to sign.
Or designate.
Our designee, that's right, it says that. He doesn't personally have to sign it, but he has to approve a designee.
Is this just the complaint side?
That's the whole thing.
You do have the CCAC office.
Yeah, you still have
Downstairs.
help.
Downstairs.
Turn them loose in the office.
Okay, I'll second it.
Discussion. Would that work for you, Terry?
Sure. I'm thinking. I'm thinking that, I talked to you about talking to Bob Smith, and I never got a chance to. I think I'm fine with that vote, because we can always change it, but I actually think that with, once summer is, everybody travels in the summertime, I'm not sure that we don't have that he wouldn't take more initiative if he felt like he was safe.
With one of us, or with the board kind of taking over, don't you think we could make him be
Yeah,
safe?
you can work my hours. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Mr. Chairman,
Sir?
I went out a couple of sites with Bob and, who's the other guy that was with me. And I'll tell you what, they had the most fun out there doing some measurements and things, and I'd be willing to come in. I'm in a lot anyhow. And they include those people, and if we get enough people there, eventually we can step back and make sure all the paperwork's done.
Yeah.
If we have a room where we can put things on a computer and where we can type up the letters in there, and then just go in and get them run off.
We said we got one downstairs.
I
have a room. You'd have
But
to
I like
update on
basement.
the computer down there. I think that down there is, let's see.
High 400.
It's still white.
100.
And the monitor's about that big, so.
But I'd be willing.
I just don't want Harry putting up any personal pictures.
I think I've got a laptop or so that I can probably bring in and donate to this.
But I need.
Probably got several, write it off.
So, let's, any more discussion, let's vote, any more discussion, I think that maybe
Mr.
we ought
Chairman, I'll
to,
call for a reading of the motion.
maybe what we ought to do is amend that motion.
That's fine, that's why I asked for a reading.
What about if we, okay, the motion is for the board to set up an office and take over CCAC responsibility.
No,
You have
no.
the stop.
To take over take over covenant CCAAC is a volunteer committee to the
Covenant enforcement?
Yeah.
Covenant and enforcement?
all covenant enforcement. CCAAC is a volunteer committee to the board.
Covenant enforcement and.
That's what get me out of the dark office and go down there.
That's
We
fine.
can lock you in.
They're putting us in the
I don't know
basement,
what they have
Harry.
to put.
I know that.
Actually, we're putting ourselves in the basement, what the hell?
You still have them, they're still there.
They're covenant enforcement. Now,
They're a committee.
To make an initial.
Oh, my goodness, this meeting's never gonna end.
You don't need to put stop work
You
resolution.
should stay overnight.
It's already spelled out.
No,
Here by 8.
if I remove the manager, I'm leaving in his ability to sign the stop work order. Yes, we're removing him, but we still need that second person to sign. If you want to retain, if you want to take him totally out, that's fine. But now you're going to have two board members to sign that.
We just need somebody else to sign it.
Yeah, well, he has the ability to appoint, an agent on his behalf.
As long as it isn't a board member.
Correct.
I can appoint the board member to sign it too.
Yeah, you can ask him to, yes, you can.
Mhm.
Because he
Don't
has
let
the
Harry
power to
fool
do
you.
that.
He's in here more than they are.
Yeah. I can see Harry laying on those stop work orders.
Just sign here, Harry.
I got beans.
Okay. So is it straight?
And
call the
you was
questions.
offered an amendment to
I
that.
haven't even decided what I'm going to.
I haven't even figured out the motion yet.
He's writing it down.
Okay, so board members for the board to set up an office and take over covenant enforcement and removing manager from covenant enforcement except the manager from
The stop work order.
covenant source.
Jim's trying to act
Or
nonchalant.
except-
He wants to do a
Sign the
habit.
stop.
Yeah, except signing the stop work order.
And you said.
I will, yes.
How's that affect?
Now, could we amend that to say, or to, I'd like to try it. It might not work.
Well, we change it.
Then we change it that time. Yeah, we can.
We make us an enterprise then.
Yeah.
Make us an enterprise.
Okay, we're gonna make some money now.
So, are we ready for a vote on that? Anybody, any more discussion? No. Mr. Cook, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Kraus?
Yes.
Clark Settler?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes!
Get a vote.
Yes! You're out of
Okay,
it.
so now,
Thank you.
any of these here, Mr. McBee's properties?
No.
So I make a motion, we approve all the CCAC properties here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Thank you.
I second that motion.
Discussion.
Do we have a second? Terry?
Yeah, Terry
I did,
second.
yes.
Now discussion.
You have two, or you have, let's see here, one by, the two board members, in my opinion, should abstain, but that's left to them. VFC is controlled by two board members, and they'll be voting for their own work. Also, that building is out of compliance with covenants.
I know I abstain number 5, I'll abstain from voting for number 5.
Any more discussion? Let's take a vote.
So we're voting for 1 through 4 right now.
1 through 4
correct?
right now.
No, roll.
He's got them all on there.
Go 1 through 4.
You'll have to
Yeah, so I'm
change your
gonna
motion.
amend my motion, why in the world? You guys have got me all messed up tonight. I'm gonna blame it on you guys. So I'm gonna amend my motion that we approve 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can vote on PFC separately.
The second, Terry, is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's take a vote on 1, 2, 3, and 4. Mr. Hochstetter?
Yes.
Ms. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
No.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. All right.
I move we approve number 5.
I'll second.
Discussion. We already had discussion.
Mr.
Anything
Chairman,
more?
reiterate that this building is
Okay.
out of compliance. We're in discussion.
Yep.
Reiterate that this building is out of compliance with the current covenants on that unit.
Other discussion?
I just wanted to clarify the roof that they're putting on is in compliance. They has to go through overbuilding. Thank you. Regional building.
Mr. Hochstetter? How do you vote?
I'd stay.
He's,
Okay. Ms. Kraus?
I vote yes, I'm not abstaining.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
No.
Chair abstains. Passes.
I think you guys all need to look up the laws about what you have to abstain from.
We already did
Wait a
that one.
minute. How does it pass when there's two?
Okay.
2-1.
2-1.
2-1.
Because when they abstain, it automatically goes down as far as the majority.
Okay, you have your sheets in there, they're somewhat updated, there was a letter to the.
Wait a minute, are we still under, reviews? Just making sure, you're moving on to actions, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure, thank you.
Like I said, we had no actions, we had no committee, so, but I did receive correspondence from, a source that she sent a letter to the directors, Colorado City Metro Board of Directors. Camper trailers on empty lots and in front of houses are an epidemic in Colorado City. There are properties on Stanley and other places that have 2 or 3 campers parked in front of their house and are unsightly. Is the Metro going to allow people to live in campers outside their homes? There are campers now on Colorado by Mustang Way and another that has been off Cibola the whole summer. Another large bus has been parked at the Nomad Group all summer, formerly known as Taco Rock. Come on, come all. Free RV camping in Colorado City. What happened to the Sheriff's Task Force on Campers that was supposed to form over a year ago? Our Metro manager is now going around picking and choosing covenants and individuals he wants to target for enforcement. He has nothing better to do but enforce roof color than things that are falling apart around him. The architectural committee is there, if there is one, supposedly approved the stucco color for new building on Uray, which sticks out like a sore thumb and doesn't match existing homes in the area. Please address these concerns at the next regularly scheduled board meeting on August 31st, 2021. Oh, I forgot. Yes, I did. I went to 2 houses that were getting roofed, and I handed them an application, told them there's a process, you have CCAC involved, you're re-roofing your house, and.
Mr. Chairman, that's off the topic of the letter.
Yes, it was in the letter, sir.
I need to, get back to the letter when possible.
So, I make a motion that we adjourn.
I second that motion.
So take a vote.
Adjourn.
Mr. Manager, I made a demand for a letter. I did not receive it. If I don't receive it in 24 hours, I will take it to legal.
It was not sent. It was advised by me, to handle
I
the
need it in
situation.
writing or the letter. You were instructed in writing or a letter.
Okay, you will get it.
Is that our, are you gonna shut the meeting down? I have to do it like yours?
It was, no, it was, that I had to send a letter to the regional building to assist on all, yes.
Well, I guess now we get to challenge this,
I'll give you this. Since we passed the resolution, you'd like to know what you can do, what you can do as a board member.
I got you.
Sorry, thanks, Josh.
Recording now.
What was that?
That went way wrong.
What you can do, what you can't do as a board member.
Well, we have
See you some other time.
We have to put in a special order for a clock.